OTB AM with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent modes.
Yeah, you're very welcome along. It's Tuesday morning. It's Ger and Shane with you all the way through until 10. Shane, how are you?
Morning, Ger. How are things?
What's going on?
Very little. In fact, a lot. There's a lot happening, as it turns out.
It turns out there is a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yesterday was one of those days where every 15 minutes there was news of, difference in... Some people think it's big news, some people not. Big Manchester United day yesterday, obviously.
Yeah, big day.
Carrick is the next Manchester United manager now. That's how this works.
Is that that's the Gerrard to Liverpool succession plan as well? Is that how it works? When Carrick relegates Middlesbrough to League One. It's all these lofty ambitions. Carrick's already managed United and he did well for his 3-4 games. So maybe he just wants to leave it at that.
His record is astonishing, wasn't it? Did he win every game?
I think he did.
Right,
I think he did.
Go. I mean,
an incredible record, and won by more than one goal as well in the game. So it was impressive.
Carrick is loved though, right?
Oh, he is. Yeah. He's one of those.
You do genuinely want him at some point to have such a good career that he's in the mix for that.
Yeah. When you always want your ex-players, especially players who gave as much to the club as Carrick to kind of come back and come full circle and manage the team. But and he's one of those players who even in recent weeks has been spotted in the away end at matches as a fan with the Pete cap on, trying to be incognito. But
shut up at the golf here, of course, just because you like to watch famous golfers.
Exactly. So no, he's one of those dyed-in-the-wool United fans now, albeit with a Geordie accent and a history with the likes of Spurs as well. So yeah, a great man, Michael Carrick.
There you go. We needed to get the Man United stuff out of the way first. Obviously the Rock of Gibraltar dying was the most important thing that happened yesterday in terms of Manchester United's history. Because that was the retirement plan for Alex Ferguson until it wasn't. I don't get this stuff money. It's
got me.
You're joking, right? And then I do think now, in retrospect, would everybody, if they knew what they knew now, had just made the deal, let them have a bit of the horse, they keep the club, buy the full club outright, and they become because the value of Manchester United has massively gone up since the Glazers took control, and maybe as a trio they could have taken control of Manchester United. And he could have had a little leg of the horse, and the value of Manchester United would have been several billion, as opposed to whatever it ended up the horse was worth, which wasn't as big as everybody thought it was, and they would have been successful. Yeah,
well, I'm a space geek, Ger, and I like to think there is an alternate dimension out there, because there's an infinite universe. I think there is a dimension out there where that has happened, and where it did end happily ever after, and Rock of Gibraltar and everything just was smoothed over. I'd love to see how that panned out in that universe, wherever that universe is out there.
And JP McManus owned Manchester United.
Yeah, and that
would be interesting to see what happened.
Yeah, but the lads still made JP and Meitner still made 70 million in profit when they were selling it. I'd forgotten, Alex Ferguson talked.
It could have been billions, though.
Could have been. Yeah. 70 million is small change probably for them lads, but I remember reading Alex Ferguson's regrets in different books, and he talks about footballing regrets in terms of not playing Berbatov or Parchy Sung in big matches, but not having the progeny of Rock of Gibraltar has to be.
Yeah, now it turned out Rock of Gibraltar's progeny weren't as good as everyone thought they were going to be on the basis of how good a horse it was. So he didn't lose as much as he thought he was going to lose. That made him take a court case against the two billionaires, who then published a list of 99 very awkward questions for Alex Ferguson that never got answered. People do forget just how public the washing of the dirty laundry was. It was very public.
Yeah.
After the fight, they built up their stake. That's what it says in the paper. My recollection was that they were already building up the shareholding anyway, and
arming themselves.
Yeah, because on the off chance that this might work out, and it looked like it was a good investment. So, but the 99 questions for the board, and if you go back and look at those questions, it's like
questions about Ronaldo and Stam, and
do they have to bring that up? What?
And then there's the AGM moment as well, when someone stood up and was like, Alex, do you feel like you should resign? And I think Ferguson's on the record as saying that was a pretty embarrassing night for him, because he knows that it was awkward, when you're at wars with two of the clubs
about a horse.
Yeah.
I know. I'm not saying that it's a no fault divorce here. Why didn't they tell him up front, this is just the prize money, by the way, you're not getting any of the thing? Or why didn't they just give him the thing?
But it's what strikes me as remarkable about the whole thing is that deal is there's so much at stake financially in that deal that it's a verbal thing almost. I don't know if there was a written, but it appeared to be the back and forth, and that's why the legal battle ensued. But there was no concrete this is what we've agreed.
Yeah.
It was madness.
Yeah. Right, the big news, of course, is that Shamrock Rovers are the league champions for the third time in a row. It is a remarkable achievement from, the Stephen Bradley era, where there was definitely a period of time at the start where people were like, oh, he's not going to make it, this isn't going to work. And in fairness to Shamrock Rovers and everybody involved with making the decisions, they were like, he's a young manager, we knew he was a young manager, there's going to be some teething pains and there's going to be some growing pains. And I like, it's always a little bit unfortunate when you don't win the league on the pitch, especially when they're about to play Derry at the weekend. Yeah, and it takes away from it for the fans a little bit. But I mean, I don't think they'll care at this stage how they secure the 3 in a row. Derry get to give them the roll of honour onto the pitch and clap them onto it, as I'm sure they'll thoroughly enjoy doing that. Stephen Bradley, like 37 years of age, and that's completing nearly 6 full seasons in charge now, which just highlights how young he is. And if Stephen Kenny was to depart the Irish job tomorrow, he would be one of the main names in contention. Do you not think so? Not yet. No.
Well, what does he need to do?
Well, he's 37. He needs to have a bit of life experience about him. He'd be picking players older than him for Ireland. Look, ultimately, I don't want to be talking Stephen Bradley down. I think his career is on a trajectory that is very strong and very good, but the team has to now use this as a springboard for more success in Europe, and it'll be interesting to see with nothing left to play for how the game against Ghent goes. Yeah, well, now that at least they have the opportunity to go hell for leather in that game, because I mean, 500 grand for a win, and what is it, 100 and something grand for a draw. And now that they have the league sewn up, they can concentrate on doing that, getting a result. And what's surprising about, what's most impressive probably about Rovers winning this year, is that like Graham Burke and is it Gaffney? I had it written down here. Rory Gaffney, who, by the way, Bradley said the other day after the match that he's the best player in the league, but they've scored 9 league goals each. So to win a league, ordinarily you think, right, to win a league title you have to have a 20 goal striker. He's got 2 9-goal strikers. Neither of them have broken the double figures, which is quite remarkable for a team about to do what they're going to do. Unbeaten in 27 league games, 47 points from 51 at home. Like the dominance is, you can argue that it's good or bad for the league, but I mean, for Rovers fans right now, it puts them on a pedestal with the other teams that have achieved 3 in a row. And I know Waterford back in the 68-70, Dundalk, the great Dundalk team, but it's the Rovers team of the 80s that won the 4 in a row. Because you try and think each year, well, what's the motivation? How do they want to come back and do it again? That Rovers team that did 4 in a row in the 80s is undoubtedly going to be top of Bradley's notice board for next season. So. Yeah, I think as well the fact that they're such a strong panel, they can drop players are never quite sure if they're going to get picked, and that's, I would say, one of the most compelling motivations for the individuals to continue to perform. Yeah, and that's the type of thing that drives repeated success. You saw it with the Dubs. Anybody slightly off it, they get dropped. Yeah. But you need a wealth of experience as well. Like you look at the team even the other day, I think there was 6 players over the age of 31, and the likes of Pico Lopez and Ronan Finn and Alan Manis have been kind of part of that team throughout. Like he's built his base of the team around those. Of course he has the young players coming in and out as well, but to become a dominant team that wins 3 in a row like this, you have to have those cultured players that are there from the start, wealth of experience. And I was thoroughly impressed with what Stephen Bradley has done, because he kind of wound people up the wrong way a little bit at the start when he was kind of some of his tetchy post-match interviews and that sort of thing, a little bit like Duffer, but you come to enjoy it and want to hear his post-match interviews because of it. And look, he stands up for himself, stands up for his team, and it's a big achievement. But yeah, I would have preferred to have seen, and I think Rovers fans would have preferred to have seen it happen at the weekend. Yeah, I think for the league we also need Derry to be stronger next season, and we need everybody else to make a bit of a leap forward so that it's more in doubt. Like, we've known Shamrock Rovers are going to be the league champions, you would say, for a number of months at this point. There was a little bit where they would drop some points here and there and the gap would close a little bit, but it was never quite. Derry weren't quite going on a mad run where they were winning every game, and it was clear that the pressure was mounting to a point where it was becoming squeaky bum time. There was no squeaky bum, and for the neutrals out there, you need a little bit of squeaky bum. You do need a little bit of squeaky bum, and like, I'd also like to see them push on in the Europa League at some point and kind of do a Dundalk on it, where you pick up some points. Dundalk have 7 points after, was it 3 or 4 games? I can't remember, in one of those Europa League seasons. Open to correction on that, but I mean, Rovers would love to pick up points in Europe. I didn't like the fact that they kind of picked a
a weaker team in some of the early games, but I understood it, and now it's kind of paid dividends.
They would argue the ends justifies the means, and what they're here for. The whole point of what they're trying to do is to win this league. So
the other thing as well to mention on Stephen Bradley, and it kind of wasn't known this year to a large degree, apart from within the club, but his son Josh was going through a serious illness through most of this season, the middle of the season, so he's had to be dealing with a lot at home when he's also trying to deal with trying to win a league and push on the Europa League as well. So from that perspective, ultra impressive.
If there's fans of Premier League teams out there, I'm interested in what would convert you into somebody who is going to games on a semi-regular basis, once a month, twice a season. What would drag you to a League of Ireland game? Because Cathal is going to be completely refurbished. Obviously the refurbishment will be complete. The fourth, is it refurbished if it's newly furbed? I don't know. The build will be complete.
Yeah.
A football stadium with four sides equal, as Nathan points out.
My thing is, you see, of course I was a big Man United fan as a kid, and go to Keegan was like my home on Friday nights, and I'd go to watch matches, whether they're in the Premier Division for a period or the First Division. I haven't had really a team. People have said to me, would you not go and watch Dundalk? But and that they are the closest team in geographical proximity, but Dundalk were Man United's closest rivals, so it would be a bit strange to go and start supporting them. Now that I'm moving back to Dublin in the next week or two, Ger,
you're going to adopt a team.
I'm going to have to adopt a team. I'm going to be living in like the Smithfield kind of Stony Batter area, so I suppose you have to pick based on geography, but I can pick anyone, can't I?
You have to pick Duffer, right?
I suppose, yeah. But it'll be the biggest bandwagon support of all time. But here, if you want to put any calls out for who I should support in the comments, please let me know, because I'm open.
OTB AM is brought to you live each morning with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent mo. You can sign up or donate now at Movember.com. For some reaction, here's what's coming up. Frank Greaney at 7:55, an update on the Regency murder trial. Jonathan Wilson at 8:10, talking about Pep and also Unai Emery. Sports pages this morning, plenty in them. We'll bring you Matt Williams, the best 15 he coached against, at 8:50, and then some Pat Nevin goodness around about 9:30 this morning. Now Shane Keegan is with us to try and reflect a little bit on the achievement of Shamrock Rovers. Shane, how great an achievement is it when you have the best team and the best facilities and the best squad, at the same time you still have to get the job done? So there's definitely a mealy-mouthedness from non-Rovers fans about their achievement, but 3 in a row, you can't sniff at that.
No, you certainly can't. Look, it's absolutely it's fantastic achievement, as you say. And I suppose, to be honest with you, some of the points that you're after highlighting there as reasons why it should be easier for them to win, I would say that in itself is the biggest challenge that he has. Like, by League of Ireland standards, lads, the quality of player he has in the dressing room is incredible. Arguably the strongest squad that we've, well, certainly, since I've been kind of knocking around League of Ireland, I would argue it's possibly the strongest squad that any manager has had. But that raises incredible challenges. And you next to never hear of any dressing room disruption or unrest. Now, it might be there, and I'm sure fellas aren't happy at times, but it never leaks out or never seeps out, or, it's very, very rare that you see any form of dissent from a player who hasn't started for them or who got brought off after an hour or anything like that. I mean, start from the back there. He's got probably near enough the 4 best centre halves in the League of Ireland. One of those fellas every week can't play. The same applies to midfield. The embarrassment of riches up front is incredible. His ability to manage all of those personalities and the egos that will come with those personalities, to me, that's the most impressive part of the job that he's done. I think that goes a little bit under the radar. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. His man management skills have to be top class, lads. They really do,
Shane Hallam was pointing out as well that he's there 6 seasons and he's still a very young man. So we're not witnessing the end of his evolution as a coach at all. He's actually getting better as time goes on.
He is, and I suppose the holy grail for him now, it's just a bit of a pity that they decided to handle Europe in the manner that they have this time around, because I would love to see him operate in Europe with a full deck, where they make it the priority and we see himself test himself against some of Europe's top managers. Unfortunately, I can understand the reasons why they prioritised the league and why they made so many changes in Europe, but I would love to see Stephen Bradley go toe-to-toe with some of the top managers in Europe, because I think he's, tactically he's next to never found wanting. Any question marks that were there in the early days, and I understand why he had the headaches that he had early on. He was trying to figure out a way to accommodate the likes of Jack Byrne and Graham Burke in the same side and that kind of thing. And I don't know whether it's by accident or by design that he came across this 3-4-2-1 formation that essentially they have now stuck with for 3.5-4 seasons. But it's worked a dream from day one for them, and they have it perfected. They have it absolutely perfected. Everybody within that side knows their role. Again, they have to tweak it a little bit when they go into Europe, but League of Ireland wise, and this is the thing with them, I suppose, lads, is sometimes they're coming up against the team and they might have a bit of flexibility, and you're wondering, will they go like Derry, for example, this year? Derry regularly bounced between a back four and a back five. With Shamrock Rovers, you always know what way they're going to play. You know the shape, you know the formation, you know the style of play, you know all of that. You can do all the homework that you want and all the work you can on the training ground to try and prepare for that. And yet very, very, very few teams, even in knowing any of that, are able to combat it when it comes to the 90 minutes on the pitch on match night.
I think I remember even there was a game probably like mid to late August when they beat Dundalk 3-0 at home, Shane, and there was that was a perfect example, like their style of play and attacking from the back and attacking quickly as well. Like what we mentioned there a moment ago, that the fact that I think it's Rory Gaffney and Graham Burke have 9 league goals each, and like to secure a league title with none of your strikers having broke double figures, never mind breaking 20 goals for a season, is quite something. But it's testament to the style of play that they haven't needed that striker with loads of goals to secure the title.
Yeah, you could argue that they're a system-based team, and this is hugely to his credit, that with all the star names and all the star profiles he has in his team, they're still a system-based team. They're not based on individual moments. It's everybody within that team, as I say, has their role. And I mean, the shining example there is Rory Gaffney. As you said, like, where else would you see it, that the centre forward in a star-laden team, and a team that has won a league title pretty comfortably, anywhere else in Europe, that guy is expected to score somewhere between 20-25 goals. Rory Gaffney has scored 9, and I will be shocked if he doesn't win League of Ireland Player of the Year, because he's been outstanding at doing everything the centre forward role requires at Shamrock Rovers. And because there are so many other quality players, they're not looking for a Haaland who just gets on the end of things and pokes it home. They're looking for somebody who brings the most out of the two guys that are playing in the 10 behind them, brings the most out of the incredible attack and wing back options that they have. And Rory Gaffney has done that all year. And as I say, look, Jack, we probably see a little bit of a difference in how they play as opposed to when Jack Byrne is on the field, but not on the field. Any other role, any player missing within the Shamrock Rovers team, and it's just, okay, well, we bring in somebody else and he knows what the job spec of that role is, and the band and the team just plays on and plays to the usual high standard no matter who you are. As I say, a little bit of a caveat for Jack maybe, but again, it's fantastic what they're doing. And it's too easy to say that of course they have more money than anybody else. They didn't have more money than everybody else when he came into the role, lads, and they didn't have more money than everybody else when he won his first league title. Or certainly didn't have, I would argue they certainly didn't have the biggest budget the year he won his first league title. It's the same as, it's a very similar argument to Stephen Kenny. By the end of Stephen Kenny's reign at Dundalk, he had all the best players and he had the most money. And people are saying, oh, well, sure, it's easy for him to win it. But he didn't when he won the first one or two. He built up his own armoury there of players, and they have more money because they kept winning titles. Yes, Dermot Desmond came along and that certainly helps things as well. But my point is, he won a league title when he didn't have the biggest budget. Okay, he's winning them now when he does, but he had done it previously without it too.
That point about playing the best team in Europe, it actually, in a weird way, the success, hopefully, of Derry and anybody else who might come along next year might make it less likely that he's able to do that unless the squad gets bigger. So what's the future there in that aspect? Like, a more competitive league will probably mean that it's less likely that they do try and go after points in the European, whichever league they're in.
Yeah, and that's a killer. And as I say, I don't know what the solution is. I think we're probably a long way away from us having a coefficient at the league where the top two manage to qualify for Europa League, and like that's essentially probably what we need now, because we are going to have two superpowers in the league for the foreseeable future, and I don't know how that works. This is the issue. You look around Europe at the likes of your Sheriffs and these various different leagues that have one dominant team. They have one dominant team because that team is going to win essentially is able to win the league with their B team almost, and therefore can play their A team in Europe. But because Derry are so strong and are going to continue to be so strong, Rovers will have to continue to be at their very, very best in the league to stay winning it. And, one season you might survive, I would say, for Derry, Shamrock Rovers, with their current budgets, you might survive one season without being back in Europa League. But like two would cause serious question marks and maybe a rethink about how they structure the club. So they've absolutely got to prioritise the league first, which is really, really disappointing, because the quality of player, the quality of manager, you're licking your lips at the thought of them having a real rattle at Europe. When that period, I was chatting to the lads before, that period where I was in a role at Dundalk, lads, we had the exact opposite situation going on. Now, the Dundalk experience probably is one of the reasons why Shamrock Rovers have decided to go the route they have, because Dundalk, we did prioritise Europe. We gave Europe a right good rattle, got quite far in it and picked up a lot of money from that and all that. But in the process, failed to qualify again for the Europa League for the following year, and kind of everything unravelled, and they're only kind of fixing that now,
Yeah.
I suppose Shane, Stephen himself and Rovers fans might not thank me for this question, especially the morning after they've secured another league title. But and look, maybe I am being a bit premature linking him to an Irish job at this stage, given he is only 37. But like, we've seen him linked with clubs like MK Dons and like Lincoln City across the last couple of years. Like, is he getting to a point now where the calibre of club he's going to get linked with is going to be slightly increased and higher than the MK Dons or Lincoln Cities of the world?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think it is very important to go back to that decision. That was a huge decision in the short-term future of Shamrock Rovers, Shane. It really, really was, because, you look and you think, well, what could go wrong for Shamrock Rovers? With Stephen Bradley leaving and going across the water is definitely top of the list of things that they would look to avoid, because inevitably he seems to have very, very strong relationships with some of his real key men. I think if Stephen went across, I think you would potentially see 2 or 3 of their very best players following him. So it's a real lose-lose situation if he did go across. And those offers possibly, well, almost certainly will come again. I think they certainly will, because he's operating at such a high level now that he has to be catching eyes. And as you say, eyes probably even higher up the food chain than the ones he already caught. Look, we're all aware, and it deserves mention as well, that Stephen has done it certainly over the second half of this season, with the backdrop of the family health issues that he's got going on at home with his own son. And I know everybody in the League of Ireland would, one, be wishing them the very best luck on that front, but two, you'd look on in amazement that he's managed to maintain the focus that's required to do the job he's done. I'd be a young fella here at home. I dread to think if he found himself in a similar situation to Stephen's young fella, would you be able to stay focused and stay delivering the goods in the manner Stephen has done? That is, incredible that he's done that. And I think, that situation will, inevitably have an effect on what Stephen does over the next few years. I think he will be very, very conscious to balance his family's needs with his own footballing needs. And, I think that will see him stay put and stay in a role that's closer to home and a role that he knows exactly where he stands. So I would be very surprised to see him leaving Rovers over the next year to 2 years, to be honest with you. But beyond that, look, the sky's the limit for him. He's a fantastic manager, as you say. He's still incredibly young for a fella who's achieved all that he's achieved,
Shane Keegan, good stuff. We'll leave it there. Thanks a million.
Cheers, lads.
It's 7:55 this morning. That's Shane Keegan giving us some analysis and reaction to the news that off the field, Shamrock Rovers managed to win the league last night because Derry and Sligo drew 0-0. They'll obviously play again at the weekend, and as we talked about, big money is the reward for Derry for winning or try to win the game against Ghent. Now, OTB AM brought to you with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shaves, magnificent mo. You can sign up or donate now at Movember.com. A reminder, Braeburn Coffee is the official coffee partner at OTB. Each week we give one lucky viewer a €100 voucher to spend on some Braeburn coffee goodness at an Apple Green store near you. To enter, check out @OffTheBall on Twitter, like and retweet our Braeburn competition post, and you will be in the draw. Braeburn Coffee never compromises on quality or taste to give you the best on-the-go coffee experience on the road. It's available at Apple Green today. Now, we're joined on the line by News Talk's courts correspondent Frank Greaney to give us the very latest on the Regency Hotel murder trial. Frank, good morning. How are you doing?
Good, lads.
This trial is obviously dominating the front pages day in, day out. I think it's about a week since we spoke to you last. What's been going on in the meantime?
Well, we've had lots of evidence, as you would imagine, since we last spoke, Ger. We've heard from civilian witnesses, some people who were at the boxing weigh-in when the shooting started, when David Byrne ultimately lost his life. We've heard from a lot of Garda witnesses. We've heard post-mortem evidence. We heard the cause of death from the then deputy state pathologist. We've watched an awful lot of CCTV evidence, and we've heard some evidence too in relation to the seizure of 3 AK-47 assault rifles believed to be used in the Regency shooting. I suppose immediately after you and I last spoke, Ger, a number of civilian witnesses were called. We heard from 2 press photographers who were at the event. Now, neither of them were covering the actual boxing event, and this was a boxing weigh-in ahead of an event at the National Boxing Stadium that was due to happen the following day. Obviously, that was cancelled after what transpired at the boxing weigh-in at the Regency Hotel on the 5th of February 2016. But we heard from Colin O'Riordan. Now, he was the chief photographer with the independent newspapers back in February of 2016, and both he and crime reporter Robin Schiller were dispatched to the boxing weigh-in on the off chance that some people that were of interest to the newspaper might be at that event. Now, he was told not to bring any camera equipment, so whatever photographs he was planning to take at the event were going to be taken on his smartphone. He said that he arrived there first. Robin Schiller arrived a short time later. They went into the event. This was happening at 2:00 in the afternoon. They went in, and Robin Schiller said that he had spotted Daniel Kinahan. Daniel Kinahan, as we all know, was one of the owners of MGM. MGM was one of the promoters of this event, the Clash of the Clans. He and Matthew Macklin, the boxer Matthew Macklin, set up MGM in Marbella in Spain. Robin Schiller spotted Daniel Kinahan in that event. He brought that to Colin's attention, and after the 2 men were satisfied that they had, I suppose, satisfied their brief, they decided to leave. And just outside the Regency Hotel then, as they were leaving, they heard a loud noise. Robin turned to Colin and said that it sounded like a gunshot. And Colin O'Riordan gave evidence then last week of seeing 2 armed Gardaí, or for all intents and purposes they looked like armed Gardaí, running up the steps into the Regency Hotel. And he said he noticed that they were carrying AK-47s, and he thought that was unusual because he didn't think Gardaí carried AK-47s. He said there was another man armed with an assault rifle and tactical gear that was following them a little bit behind them, but he was following them inside the hotel. And he said that he didn't want to bring this person's attention to him. He was standing at the end of the steps. So he stayed there and he tried to look inconspicuous. But ultimately he watched 3 armed men walking into the Regency, or running into the Regency Hotel armed with assault rifles. He said he heard shots being fired. And from where he was standing just outside the hotel, he could see into the reception area. He could see a man on top of the reception desk with a gun. He said he was pointing this gun at somebody who was behind the reception desk. He said he didn't fire. He jumped back down off that desk. He heard more gunshots, and he described then, minutes later, the 3 men leaving the hotel, and he said that he was in fear for his life at this point. So he just put up his hands and he said, "Guards, I don't know where to be," and he watched as they got into a van that left the scene soon afterwards. We also heard from another press photographer. This is a man called Ernie Leslie. He was a freelance photographer back in 2016. He was dispatched to the boxing weigh-in, just like Colin O'Riordan and Robin were, with another reporter, Alan Sherry. This was, I on behalf of the Sunday World. And he described approaching the hotel. He said he was outside. He heard a commotion. He heard noises. He saw people running from the hotel. And he did think that the noises sounded like gunshots. But this was 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, and he thought surely not. But he did become concerned when he saw people rushing out of the hotel. And he said that his attention was drawn to a silver van that was parked outside the hotel. He said the driver's window was open as he and Alan approached. And he said that he noticed a hand coming out the window and the barrel of a weapon. He said instinctively he grabbed his camera, and he noticed somebody running towards them as he did so. And again, instincts kicked in, and he took a number of photographs, 7 or 8 frames. This photograph we now know is the photograph that appeared on the front page of the Sunday World of a man in a flat cap and a man with a wig dressed as a woman running from the scene. Both were armed with handguns. We also heard from James McGettigan. James McGettigan's family owns the Regency Hotel. He was working that day, and he described at about 2:30 being in the bar area. He heard a commotion. He said that 3, again, for all intents and purposes, 3 men who looked like armed Gardaí came into the bar area, told everyone to get on the ground. He said that he assumed that there had been an incident locally, that he came out of the bar. He went over to one of these men. He said that this person was completely covered up. He could make out his eyes, but nothing else. He was holding a gun. That gun was being held towards him, and he expected him to identify himself as a Garda and to explain what was going on, but he didn't. He said that they were looking for the boxers. They were screaming, looking for the boxers. Where are the boxers? He said they stayed in the bar for maybe less than a minute, and they left. He heard more gunshots, and he said he became concerned, and he said, maybe looking back a little bit naively, he said he ran into another room to raise the alarm, and he was actually the one that rang the Gardaí. So they were, I suppose, the civilian witnesses that we heard from immediately after we last spoke, Ger.
It's really shocking when you paint the picture of exactly what was going on, and just how different people react under extreme terror, really. The instincts of the photographer to take photographs, that's so ingrained, but also that kind of sense that you see Gardaí and you actually feel safe. You think, okay, this is going to be fine here. I'm in the company of somebody who knows what they're doing, and that evidence really brings home just how many people were caught up in this.
Yeah, and I think the prosecuting barrister, Sean Gallant, touched on that exact point, Ger, in his opening address. Shots had been fired in the hotel. There were about 200 or 250 people there. As you can imagine, panic struck. People were fleeing for their lives. They were looking for exits. And then they spotted Gardaí coming in, and that just caused even more confusion, particularly when they also started firing shots. We heard and we saw CCTV evidence last week, and at various points since we've spoken, we've been shown, from different points of view of the prosecution's case that it's trying to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You get the feeling that CCTV is going to feature heavily. There were lots of cameras both inside and outside the Regency Hotel that captured what happened on that day. We saw 2 of the gunmen, again, the man with the wig dressed as a woman, and also the man with the flat cap, who we now know is a man called Kevin Murray, a dissident Republican who was one of the gunmen on that day. He has since passed away. We were shown CCTV footage of them entering the hotel through a laundry room entrance. We were shown the footage of the 3 men dressed as armed Gardaí entering the hotel. At 2:32, we were shown footage of David Byrne running, in the middle of a crowd, clearly identifiable in the footage that we were shown, running from the Regency suite where the boxing weigh-in had been taking place, running towards the reception area. He stops, he comes back in shot, seemed to be running back towards the suite from which he had come from, and then turns on his heels again and goes back to the reception area. And we know that that's where he was shot 6 times by 2 of the tactical men. There was also a very distressing image shown just shortly after that of David Byrne's feet just out of shot, clearly lying on the ground. This was after he had been shot. We heard Tactical 1, or the armed raider that was described in court as Tactical 1, shot him. He hit the ground. Tactical 2 shot him. Tactical 2 went back and coldly and calmly shot him in the head and body. In the post-mortem evidence, the then Deputy State Pathologist, Dr. Michael Curtis, gave evidence of going to the scene that evening. There was a forensics tent in the reception area. Inside it lay the body of David Byrne. He was lying up against the desk. His head was lying in a pool of blood, and Dr. Curtis said from that preliminary examination it was very obvious that he had suffered catastrophic gunshot wounds to the head. He gave, and I won't go into them in any detail because they are quite graphic and distressing, but he gave some very detailed evidence about the post-mortem he carried out the following day, and ultimately his conclusions were that David Byrne had died from 6 gunshots to the head and body, fired from a high velocity weapon, and he said that if death wasn't instant, it would have been rapid. Turning back to that CCTV evidence, we see the armed raiders leaving the hotel. We see a van leaving the vicinity of the hotel. We see 6 men running up a nearby laneway that runs alongside St. Vincent's GAA Club. And it is the prosecution's case that at the top of that lane were the getaway vehicles. The van was found burnt out at Charlemont Estate a short time later. We were also shown CCTV footage from the day before, Ger, and this showed Patrick Dowdall, the father of a former Sinn Féin councillor, Jonathan Dowdall. Both of them men have been sentenced to, Jonathan Dowdall got 4 years in prison. His father, Patrick, got 2 years for facilitating what happened at the Regency Hotel that day by making a hotel room available to the criminal organisation behind the attack. We see CCTV footage of Patrick Dowdall arriving at the scene at about 7:30 in the evening before. He seems to check in. He hands over some cash to the receptionist. He's handed key cards. He goes to the second floor to room 2104. He stays there for about 10 minutes. He then leaves the hotel. 1 hour later, then we were shown footage of a taxi pulling up, a man getting out of that taxi, doesn't go to reception area, goes straight up to the second floor, again to room 2104. That man we now know was Kevin Murray. Kevin Murray came out of the room at about 10 o'clock. He had gone into it with a bag. He came out of it without the bag. He is seen leaving the room the following morning again with the bag and leaves the hotel at that point. A PSNI officer gave evidence and he identified Kevin Murray as being the person in that photograph that was taken by Ernie Leslie. We were also shown CCTV footage of the movement of various vehicles around the city in the lead up to the shooting. And this is the case, I suppose, against the other 2 men that we haven't spoken about who were sitting in the dock alongside Jerry the Monk Hutch, 2 Dublin men, Paul Murphy and Jason Bonney, both in their 50s. Now, they're not accused of murder. They're facing and have denied a less serious charge, that of facilitating the murder by, I suppose, contributing in the sense of they are accused of offering logistical support through the provision of certain vehicles. There are identification issues. The prosecution will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they are the persons seen in various clips that have been shown to the judges over the past few days. We've also heard evidence, Ger, of the seizure of 3 AK-47s from the boot of a car. Now, this was on the 9th of March 2016, so 1 month, or to be exact, 33 days after the shooting. A Garda intervention team was dispatched to a location just outside Slane, County Meath on that day. They stopped a Donegal reg car. It was being driven by a Donegal man called Shane Rowan. He is an IRA man. He subsequently pleaded guilty to firearms offences and IRA membership. He has been jailed for 7.5 years. They opened up the boot, and hidden inside the boot they found 3 AK-47s. They also found loaded magazines. These were taken away for analysis. The car was analysed. That burnt out van, the suspected getaway vehicle, was also analysed. And yesterday we heard from a ballistics expert, a Detective Sergeant David O'Leary, who was physically handed one by one 3 AK-47s. Now, he analysed those weapons, and before he gave his evidence yesterday, he checked to make sure that they were safe. He assured the court and the judges that they were, and he gave evidence of inspecting those weapons. We heard that they were Kalashnikov variant rifles. They came from Romania, China, and the former Yugoslavia. He said the bullets that were found at the Regency Hotel, the spent cartridges after the bullets were fired, he said he examined those, and after examining both the weapons and those discharged cartridges, he formed the opinion that the bullets that were fired at the Regency Hotel, the 6 bullets that took David Byrne's life, were fired from the 3 weapons that were found in the boot of that car that was stopped just outside Slane 1 month later.
Strike marks noted yesterday as well in that ballistics discussion as well, Frank?
That's right, Shane. There was a lot of detailed evidence from Detective Garda O'Leary. He did go and examine the scene after the shooting as well, and he noticed and referenced a number of strike marks. And he said that this strike mark, one strike mark in particular, was found just to the right of the stage where the weigh-in was taking place that day back in February 2016, and you get very detailed evidence of where and how they found various cartridges, that were scattered around the floor of the reception area and also inside in that suite. It was fascinating to hear the evidence just in relation to the firearms and, actually seeing the weapons physically in court yesterday being taken out of evidence bags and being handed to the witness, and then the drama of Detective O'Leary, physically examining the weapons just to make sure that they were safe. But aside from all of that drama, you have to remember that a life was taken in all of this. It is the prosecution's case that those weapons were used to kill David Byrne. And Jerry, the monk hutch, who is sitting in the dock, listening intently with headphones on, he does need the assistance of a hearing aid. He has pleaded not guilty to this charge. He is facing the murder charge. And as I said earlier, the two men in the dock beside him have pleaded not guilty to those lesser charges of helping the criminal organisation.
Frank, good stuff. We leave it there. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
No bother. Thanks, lads. That's
Newstalk reporter Frank Greaney giving us the update on that trial. If you want to get in touch with us this morning, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Now, Regatta Great Outdoors are launching their new Freddie Flintoff collection this autumn, and to celebrate we have a €100 Regatta voucher to give away every day, and one lucky winner will get a €500 voucher to be in with a chance of winning. Tell us which German manager this is needlessly worrying about OTB AM co-host Shane Hannon's fitness heading into this week's run of shows.
The game came too early for him, so it was. I think he will be fine Wednesday. I hope he's fine on Wednesday, but for today it was too quick.
You can tweet us your answer on our main Twitter page @OffTheBall, and remember, shop the Freddie Flintoff collection in store at Regatta Great Outdoors or online at regatta.ie. After the break, we're live with football writer Jonathan Wilson reacting to the news that Unai Emery will take over as the new Villa manager, as well as looking at why Pep Guardiola's Manchester City struggle tactically in the bigger games. Back after this.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
The Koi Gig Pod on OTB Sports.
I just didn't speak for nearly 3 minutes, especially the last 6 minutes. I couldn't speak because I was just I wasn't breathing. And I actually felt physically sick. I thought I was going to actually puke because I was so nervous.
Keep up to date with all the WSL action every Tuesday and subscribe to the feed in the OTB Sports app now. OTB AM with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent modes.
Right, sometimes you get dealt a good hand. We had booked Jonathan Wilson to talk about Pep Guardiola, and then overnight Unai Emery becomes the Aston Villa boss, so I get to ask you about that as well. Jonathan, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm a Villa fan, so I'm pretty happy, actually, I think. Should I be happy?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think Emery is a very, very good coach. I think what we saw of him at Arsenal, I think wasn't probably as bad as it was made out to be. I think there was sort of a lot of mockery of him for his English, which is a ludicrous thing to complain about. I think perhaps people hadn't quite appreciated how difficult it was to replace Wenger. But you look at his record at Sevilla, at Villarreal. He is a very, very good coach. I have two slight notes of caution. The first is to do with him, which is that all his success has come in Spain, that whenever he's left Spain, it hasn't really worked out for him. So PSG, I mean, yes, he won the league there, but I think he found that very, very difficult. Yeah, PSG is an extremely difficult club to manage. Arsenal, I guess you put in the same bracket, a difficult club to manage for different reasons. When he went to Spartak Moscow, it didn't really work out for him there. Again, I think there are mitigating circumstances, but the three attempts he's had outside of Spain haven't been great. So that's one note of caution. And the second is to do with the club, which is if they approached, as we're led to believe, Pochettino and Thomas Tuchel and possibly also Brendan Rodgers, I'm not seeing any sort of consistency, anything that links those four coaches. That feels like they're just going for famous people. Three of whom happen to be former PSG managers. So I would worry that there's a sort of lack of a overarching plan behind the scenes. But yeah, maybe they feel that they're at a stage of a development where they need a coach to lead that development after what I think was a pretty dismal failure of the Steven Gerrard year.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the celebrity of that list, and I was actually thinking that this is kind of a reaction to the Gerrard failure. It's like somebody with vast experience versus somebody who was really at the start of their, apart from the 3.5 years or 2.5 years at Rangers, like a very inexperienced coach who is very famous as a player. Here is somebody who is very experienced comparatively, who doesn't have a stellar playing career behind him, and very often clubs and international federations who don't really know what they're doing, they go one way and then that didn't work, so let's go the complete diametrically opposite, which would suggest that it's not particularly visionary or it's not part of an overarching plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think what Gerrard plus the those four names you just listed have in common is they are really well known. So what I'd like my club sporting director to be doing is saying, right, this is the sort of football we want to play. Here's my list of half a dozen players for every position who we might be targeting. We're monitoring them, looking at their progress, looking at where their contract situation is, and also have a short list of maybe half a dozen coaches who you can turn to if things go wrong. And those coaches, I guess, ideally, would not necessarily be household names. They'd be, there's this guy who's doing brilliant stuff at Paderborn, or doing great stuff in the Greek league or whatever. And your expertise has allowed you to identify a sort of cheap prospect, a cheap target. But clearly there is a massive risk of that sort of figure. Emery, I think, is somebody worth having a punt on, because, as I say, I think he's probably better than Villarreal. I think he's probably undervalued in this country, certainly. And in terms of having success with a club who's just outside the elite. So, success in Spain wasn't with Real Madrid or Barcelona. It was with Sevilla and Villarreal. If you want somebody to take you into the Europa League, and his record in the Europa League is phenomenal. I mean, 4 wins plus another final. So I think there's a logic from that point of view. But yeah, that concern of what is the long-term vision. And I think you've seen that with the signings. I mean, if you've signed Emi Buendia for what I think was a club record fee, and then almost immediately you're signing Felipe Coutinho, and can you play the two together? Did you just get Coutinho because he was famous and because he was available?
Yes.
I think that has sort of dogged their decision making over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of those players at the club who are kind of, we've got 2 players in the same position who are equally not effective at the moment. What style of football does Emery play? Is he more flexible? Does he have a particular style that he always uses everywhere?
Well, I think what he's very, very good at doing is setting up his team to frustrate better teams. I think that's why his success has really come in those 2-legged European competitions. I think he's exceptional at that. He's never really put together a phenomenally consistent run over a league season. So I think it is pretty. They're not going to be massively on the front foot. They're not going to be massively attacking. I think his strength is in creating a team that's going to be solid and going to attack well on the break. Whether the squad is ideally suited for that, I'm not convinced. I think the issues at the centre of defence, I think, would test any coach. He obviously has worked with Carlos before, as and when he returns to fitness. So yeah, he's from the slightly more controlled side of Spanish football rather than the sort of free flowing uber possession style.
So don't expect blood and thunder and lots of excitement in my football watching future.
Well, no, but I think it will be a lot more fun than Gerrard. So,
okay. Well, that wouldn't be hard.
Relative terms, yeah.
We were due to talk last week, but the Gremlins were in the system about Pep Guardiola and this body of evidence that's growing about... I don't know how to phrase this without kind of making it too black and white, but it does certainly seem as if sometimes, instead of picking his best players in his best positions, he decides to respond to what he expects the opposition to do, and then therefore hands the opposition an opportunity to get into games where you sometimes feel like if he just plays his best players, it could be 2-0 at half time and the game would largely be over. You've done loads of work. You've written about this extensively. a week on, and now knowing everything we know about this Liverpool team, what was in Pep's head in the build-up to the Liverpool game?
I think in many ways it's just sort of the greatest narrative, certainly on the pitch of football over the last sort of 10 years or so, that you have this brilliant coach who is habitually in charge of brilliant teams with brilliant players, and you just sort of think, well, just go out and do it. And they would win more often than not. And yet again and again and again in the biggest games, particularly in Europe, he fails. And his record in Europe, given how successful he's been domestically, given the stature of club he's been in charge of, to only have won the Champions League twice, remarkable achievement as that is, it feels like he's falling short. And I think the fact that he had the success early, wins it in 2009, wins it in 2011, and you look at the way that Barcelona team, which I think is probably the greatest team of my lifetime, the way they went out the Champions League about 2010 and 2012. So 2010, the game against Mourinho's Inter, where they were 3-1 down from the first leg, and they win 1-0, but that's not enough. And they have 81% of the ball and all the shots in the world, and they can't score. Then almost even more freakish, the defeat to Chelsea in the semi-final in 2012. And it's like those two defeats, which you should be able to write off as freaks, but it's like they've sort of got in his head. And he's sort of thinking, well, what caused them? Oh, it was because we got done on the break. So what we've got to do is we've got to stop ourselves getting done on the break. And then everything he does to prevent getting caught on the break somehow seems to make his team even more vulnerable, while also diminishing the attacking qualities they have. So you saw that when Bayern lost to Atletico, which was that also semi-final in 2016. And yes, they were by far the better team, but somehow luck went against them. And the more that luck's gone against him, the unluckier he seems to get, and the more he seems to make these tweaks and these changes. I think the Lyon game is the one that you sort of think, yeah, it's Lyon. They were mid-table side in France. Just go out and batter them in the same way you'd batter, Villa or Brighton or whoever. But switched to a back three, and they got done by Maxwell Cornet. And then even Liverpool last week, I mean, Klopp has a better record than any other coach against Guardiola. Certainly of any coach who's played more than sort of 4 or 5 games against him. I think he's the only coach who's got a better than 50% record. And there's something in Klopp's football which clearly Guardiola teams find hard to play against. But Liverpool this season have not been good. You sort of think it's an opportunity for City just to go out, just to play. And they almost certainly will overwhelm them in the way that, Fulham on the opening day of the season, although it was only a 2-2 draw, Fulham had by far the better of that game. You think, well, if you have that, plus you have Haaland, you will win. And yet he goes to that sort of hybrid formation, that sort of semi-back three. He's got Cancelo playing as a right wing-back rather than on the left, where he was far less effective. We'd seen the previous season that Foden against James Milner. I mean, Milner should have been sent off last season. Foden absolutely destroyed him in that game. But rather than just letting Foden run at him, he plays him slightly deeper in a sort of semi-left wing-back role. And I think it's, even if you can make a rational case for each of those tactical switches, I think the cumulative effect is twofold. So one is, it's just not the shape City are used to. And I accept that he makes tweaks all the time that we perhaps don't acknowledge. But that was a radical shift from that basic 4-3-3 template. So some of that familiarity, some of that naturalness, some of that cohesion has gone. But also, I think players have begun now to sort of think, oh, God, what's he done? He's done it again. And so I certainly heard players talking about that in the aftermath of the Champions League final against Chelsea. And I heard Chelsea players saying the opposite. They looked at the City team sheet and thought, he's done it again. So overthinking maybe is a sort of an oversimplistic way of putting it. But there is this tendency to make changes that are probably needless in the biggest games. And I find it fascinating that he is like this Greek tragic hero, that he has this fatal flaw that undermines him over and over again. And the great thing is, where City could just be this sort of steamroller, charging through everything, winning everything all the time, the humanness, that human frailty, that doubt, means that they don't. And that, I think, is a from a narrative point of view, is fascinating.
I think that Foden example you bring up, Jonathan, is a perfect one. Like, if you're a City fan, you're watching that game going, Jesus, just let the man get forward. I mean, as you said, he's tormented Milner in the past, so not encouraging him to do the same seemed a very strange one. And look, that this back three, or de facto back three, as you say, like, if it's set up to stop City being so vulnerable in the counter attack, the reality is it just didn't work. So do you think going forward Pep is going to continue with it? Is he dogged and arrogant like that he's going to say no, next time we're going to try it again, or do you think he'll learn from his mistake?
I don't think it's an arrogance. I think, if anything, it's the opposite. I think it's an insecurity that he knows that's, there's this brilliant, no team is perfect. The blanket is never quite big enough. There's always a slight gap. And in Guardiola teams, it is that because they play the high line, because they hold possession so well, that a direct ball, a quick ball over the top can undo them. Now Guardiola previously has tried to counter that. That line he came out with, which, to be honest, it took me a long time to really sort of work out what he meant. And I think it's only really this season that I think I fully understood what he meant, because we're now seeing the opposite. And that line is that when City win the ball, unless there's a really obvious chance of an immediate counter-attack, he doesn't want his team to do what a Klopp team would do, which is just to surge forward and try and hit the opposition when they're not quite set. He wants his team to control possession, control the ball. He says have 15 passes to get set, because if you attack before that, you're not ready for the opposition to counter against you. And that I think is one of the reasons why, at its worst, Guardiola football can be a little bit sterile, a little bit tepid, because you don't have that sort of end-to-end nature you get with a Klopp team, for instance. That it is very much about control. But when you have Erling Haaland there, you can't play like that. Because if you look at the Community Shield, when Haaland was widely criticised, well, I think he had 16 touches he had or something. But then you watch it back, and you look at how many runs he made where the ball wasn't being played quickly enough. And if the ball had just been knocked into space, an easy pass for anybody, never mind Kevin De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva, and the pass just wasn't played because they were getting set, ready to prepare the structure in case they lost the ball and they were counted against. But Haaland needs the ball quickly. That's one of his great strengths. And not to play to that would make no sense. So they are going a bit more direct. But I think what that does is it exacerbates that vulnerability that's already there. And you saw that the game against Newcastle when they were 3-1 down. You saw it against Palace when they were 2-0 down and should have been 3-0 down. That flaw that's always been there is there but magnified. Now, whether the extra goal threat of Haaland is worth that, I think we'll only see in the last stages of Europe. City scoring lots of goals is almost irrelevant. They've been the top scorer in the Premier League for the last 5 seasons. If Haaland means they score 10%, 20% more goals, well, sort of so what? What's important is, in the Champions League quarter-final, semi-final, final, does that increase vulnerability to a thing that they're already worried about? Is that counteracted by the fact they can also now score goals when not in control, when not necessarily playing particularly well?
He gave a relatively interesting interview to Jan-Åge Fjørtoft. There's 10 minutes of it on Fjørtoft's Twitter, if anybody wants to watch it, where he didn't have the usual kind of slightly patronising attitude towards the questions. He was interested and engaged in them. And I don't know if I believe him or not, but he says that the first thing he does is he looks at his players and then he adapts the style of play to the players that he has available to him. Now, maybe on a week-to-week basis, or when he arrived at Bayern Munich, that might have been something he did. And clearly at Man City, he's been there long enough they're all his players, really. But the arrival of Haaland and injecting him into the team, the way you're speaking about it, kind of forces a bit of a rethink there. And maybe it's true. Maybe having Erling Haaland means he is going to ask his players not to have the 15 passes before they ping one long. Just to ping a few long and let's see what happens. Is this where the evolution comes, and maybe he himself becomes more automatic in his thinking as opposed to in himself so much?
I don't think it's automatic. I think he will look at Haaland and he'll say, right, we've got this extraordinary asset. How do we use him best? And we've seen, I think, an evolution. I mean, that goal, was it the first goal against Brighton on Saturday? Was just Ederson smacked it long? Like, you wouldn't have seen... I mean, it's an absurd thing to say you wouldn't have seen him doing that to Sergio Aguero, because Aguero wouldn't have relished that type of pass. He certainly wouldn't have done it last season when they didn't really have a forward, and you'd have been pinging it at Foden playing as a false nine or something. So I think we are seeing them play more direct. The game against West Ham, you saw how much more direct they were. I think City, certainly in the Premier League or the early stages of the Champions League, they're never going to be that direct because teams very rarely come out against them. So there's no space to hit with direct passing. You sort of got to manipulate the space a bit to create that space. So Guardiola, I think he has evolved. I think he's evolved a lot since 2008. I think that's been one of the fascinations is what the last sort of decade or so is watching how he and Klopp have both evolved. They've challenged each other and they've both learned from that. So yeah, you evolve from changes in football. You evolve from the players you have available, and you evolve from what the opposition is doing against you. I don't think there's ever been any doubt that Guardiola is. It's not that he has his one true method and applies that in all circumstances. Yeah, he's always tweaked it and changed it. The danger is of the thing that's undone him, I think, in certain Champions League games is that he's done that too much. He almost hasn't trusted himself, hasn't trusted his process enough. Whereas maybe more relaxed coach would just sort of say, "We're the best team in Europe, go out and win it."
I'd love to see what would happen if he did that. Just like how those players would respond. It'd be. Look, maybe he gets done on a counter attack in that game, and we're all like, "Oh, that's you are cursed."
The time he sort of did that was when Bayern went to Barcelona in 2015, and he sort of, it was almost like the logic was nothing we can do will stop Lionel Messi, so let's just go for it. Let's press really hard. Let's press really high. I don't know if you remember that game, but. It was. I think it was still 0-0 after about 75 minutes, and Barca went on to win 3-0 because Bayern were absolutely shattered. But that first 20 minutes, half an hour, Barcelona could have been 4 or 5-0 up. And I think he's also got that warning in his mind that if we are too loose, that's what can happen. And I also just think the person he is, all the success he's had, everything, even as a player, has been through analysis. It's been thinking. As a player, he wasn't naturally a great player. He was a great mental player. He tactically, he was a great player. Technically, he was a very good player, but it was tactically, he was a great player. And if he didn't do the research, if he didn't make those little tweaks and make those little changes, and then it failed, I think that he would really feel like he'd let himself down. I mean, the thing that I'm always conscious of with this is, do you remember after the Bielsa and the Spygate furore, when Bielsa gave that 2-hour press conference, and somebody, I think, asked the question, why do you need to do all this research into the opposition when you have bundles of data and bundles of research that you can just, you subscribe to some service and you just download it. And Bielsa said something like, I have to look under every rock, even though I know it is useless, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be true to myself and I would never forgive myself. And I wonder if there's something in similarly neurotic about Guardiola, that he feels that his job is to investigate every permutation, to investigate every combination, to analyse everything. And if he doesn't do that, if he did just sort of say, go out and play, that he would be letting down the club, letting himself down professionally.
Jonathan, I know you wrote a match report on the Chelsea United game at the weekend, and which probably leads me to believe you were in the press box there with a close vantage point in Stamford Bridge to the two managers. What were your main takeaways from that game? And I guess seeing Eric Ten Hag up close, he's reportedly sitting down with his number 7 Cristiano Ronaldo today for peace talks, but he certainly wasn't holding back with those celebrations late in the game with Casemiro's goal. But a fascinating game to be at, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'm very glad I was doing the follow-up, not the runner, because I think that would have been an incredibly difficult game to write on live, because it was one of those matches where you couldn't sort of say, oh, this is just rubbish, and sort of slag the game off and say, this is really boring, nothing's happened. It was constantly intriguing, but it was very difficult to know which way it was going to go. So one of the great things with where the press box is at Stamford Bridge, you're right behind the away dugout. So when Fred came on, what was that, 51 minutes, something like that? What was fascinating was just how much information he was given before he came on. Ten Hag had this magnetic tactics board, and was clearly, it must have been a good sort of minute and a half of instructions. Then there was one of the younger backroom staff who had an iPad. I couldn't actually see what was on the iPad, so it was very difficult to know what he was being shown. But there must have been a good, I reckon, sort of 3 to 4 minutes of tactical instruction to Fred before he went on. And so the fact that you saw Chelsea change shape from a back three to that midfield diamond after, what was that, about 35 minutes, the Potter changed that. And you saw the pattern of a game change, that United's, having been pretty dominant, suddenly would force back 10 or 15 yards. And then I guess Ten Hag was just seeing how the beginning of the second half played out before he made the change. And they went to a diamond as well to match it up. So it was one of those games where you really saw coaches making tactical changes, and you saw the impact of that straight away. So I think Chelsea obviously will be frustrated to concede that late, but a draw was probably right. And I think you saw just how high a level both those coaches are working at. And the thing that's impressive with Ten Hag has been just how steely he's been. There was a moment in that Brentford game when they lost 4-0 when he looked a bit isolated, looked a bit lost on the touchline. And then the fact that the following day, even if it's only symbolic, having the players in doing that punitive 13k run because they ran 13k less than Brentford. And now you look at him in press conferences, and there is just that glint of something slightly dangerous and slightly unhinged in his eye. And I think you probably have to have that to face down Ronaldo. And he has done that. And he's got all the cards now. He's effectively won that battle.
It can't go any other way now. He's managed to take a situation where all of Ronaldo's fans in the media, and there's loads of them, who are week in, week out at the start of this, he needs to be in the team, what a great goal scorer, what a great presence around the place. Suddenly, Ronaldo is diffident, obstreperous, egotistical, selfish, all these things that he was at the start, but now everybody is saying it. It's, if you were to stand back, because I thought it was a ludicrous thing to say I couldn't put him on to humiliate him in the derby, but actually he was happy to put him on for 2 minutes at the end of the Spurs game. So he was playing a long game, and he seems to have won it very hands down.
Yeah, I mean, if he's been playing a game, it might just be that he did what he thought was right. That he wanted Ronaldo on that last sort of 2 minutes plus injury time, just to hold the ball up, give him an outlet. But it's worked out very, very well for him. And I guess maybe if this was some sort of conscious plan, that was exactly the right time to do it after United's best performance in, I don't know, certainly well over a year. And I think that's the other thing. It's not just Ronaldo's behaviour. It's the fact that United now are actually playing good football again. That win against Spurs, they were incredibly impressive. The first half hour against Chelsea, they were well on top. A 1-1 draw at Stamford Bridge is a good result, and it was a high level of game. So I think the fact that there is obvious progress there, it's now's the time to. I mean, then the progress has come because Ronaldo's not on the team, and when he does play, as he did against Newcastle, as he has in a couple of Europa League games, they've looked pretty flat. They've lacked that fluency and mobility up front. So that even when Rashford is missing chances, his movement makes United function better. And I think that was always true, but I think it's become really obvious now.
Jonathan, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. That was great. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Jonathan Wilson there. You can read his stuff in The Guardian and other places, of course, but loads of books out as well. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Stamford Bridge press box is one of those places apparently where you do get a good vantage point. But to see Ten Hag's body language change over the last number of weeks and months it definitely has been notable. I think United fans at the start were like, he's one of these managers again who just sits in the dugout and kind of stands the touchline, doesn't really gesticulate like Klopp or Guardiola. But all of a sudden,
he needed to get in. He needed to it needed to be his. He needed to win a few of those battles, and the way it's working out. I was definitely, why aren't you playing Casemiro? If he needs game time, he's not going to get game time unless you give him game time. But, Casemiro seems happy enough with how things are going at the moment.
Yeah.
He's going to be coming into an excellent vein of form just in time for the World Cup, and he's going to remember how it was all managed properly. And
100%.
Ten Hag's his guy, and all the rest of the players who he signed are all his guys.
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated to hear the insight as well. That Fred got so much detailed prep before he came on, but the point there is that Fred is one of those players he's the Rottweiler for the team. So
you can take it.
Every manager has loved him. Solskjaer, Rangnick, Ten Hag. They've all played him in games, which speaks testament to him. He obviously follows instructions, so maybe that's why he's.
They all keep picking him.
Exactly, yeah.
It's 8:40 this morning. OTB AM is brought to you live with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent mo. It's nearly time for us all to shave down. You can sign up or donate now at Movember.com. Time for the sports pages.
There are so many idiots out there, so many spoofers. There's a lot of horse.
I think he's a total spoofer.
What do you mean a spoofer?
He's just bullshit.
No, Eamon, come on, don't be. No, I'm not. Yes. No.
Going to run you through the sports pages, and is there an Irish Times sports section? Here we go. So, back page of the Herald. Sky end GA TV deal as BBC wait in wings, and FAI kit supplier get legal advice. It was a mad day yesterday for news, as I said. Rocket Gibraltar and Michael Carrick also, and of course Shamrock Rovers crowned champions. That's Jamie McGonigal failing to score last night. Derry City was obviously failing to score against Sligo Rovers, so Rovers did Rovers a favour. The truce is out there. Ron and Ten Hag hope to make peace. I guess you might want him for a few games. In the meantime, he wants to play some minutes. We're now at the end game, so it's like, well, I want my legacy to be that I was a good guy.
At best for Ronaldo now, like he stays to the end of the season. Maybe it feels unlikely at the minute, but maybe he does. I mean, Sheriff on Thursday night, I'd be surprised if he didn't play some part in that, given he's played in the Europa League games thus far. So if the talks go well today, then he should be back in the team. But yeah, for how long we'll see.
Back on the bench.
Well, he'll probably start in the Europa League.
Sorry, in the Europa League, sure. Yeah.
But aside from that,
I don't care about.
Yeah, true.
No carbs in Marbs, says Pep. I thought Marbs was just exclusively a Sunday Independent Circa 2005 thing. It's actually how the rest of the world refers to Marbella as well.
It must be. It's a great phrase.
Pep Guardiola has told Erling Haaland to watch what he eats on his winter holiday to ensure he returns in tip-top shape, because he's got a track record of letting himself go, right, Pep?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's spoken about his diet before, and he drinks, or there's a high fibre diet he has in his hometown in Norway apparently. But there was a couple of fascinating pieces in the paper today. But Haaland's sleep regime: gets to bed about 10, half 10 every night.
Seems late. I would have said he was like
you would have thought so.
George W. Bush, 7 o'clock in the evening.
Puts on his.
What happens after 7 o'clock when you're leader of the free world?
Yeah, he puts on his orange glasses, or his I guess the LED or blue light glasses to sleep himself, or to get himself ready for sleep apparently every night. And he has the phone on do not disturb for hours before he goes to bed, so he's not distracted. All of this we're fascinated by because it's Erling Haaland, but it shouldn't be that surprising. I'd like to think most professional footballers have a pretty rigorous sleep regime.
Maybe they do. Maybe the lifestyle of footballers has changed and they're not all just out playing golf. Pep says he is going to be playing golf. Haaland is a house in Marbella. He will play golf and hopefully not eat much and drink much.
Well, all footballers seem to enjoy a little bit of golf in their downtime.
I think a lot of them didn't play any. Gordon Strachan was anti-golf while you were playing.
Right.
When you're retired, fine, do what you want, but it takes up it's 5 hours on your feet. You should be resting and recovering.
Use the buggies. It's grand.
Well, I mean, I suppose they do have them old buggies these days. If they are champions, the players will be really positive, or the guys knocked out might have more holidays. The incredible schedule, you've seen how many players will miss the World Cup because of this insane calendar. People are used to it. This is Pep kind of basically saying nothing well. Usual. Giving us the Marbs and Carbs and Marbs headline.
Yeah.
The Irish Times have an interesting picture from Leinster training. That's legendary New Zealander Kieran Reid, who's just visiting. He was visiting Munster. Was he at the Leinster-Munster game as a guest of Leinster, or was he at the Leinster-Munster game as a guest of Munster? He was in the UK last week, so he came over for the game on Saturday and was around for the weekend. He met a few of the lads for lunch yesterday. I would have met him last night for a bite to eat, and he was in first thing this morning. He's been around all day. He's been great, very good, just in terms of mindset. He's one of the iconic figures of the game. I wonder, is he is there a coaching job in the offing, or is it just having the crack?
I'd say just have the crack. No, I could have egg in my face when he's confirmed as part of some coaching ticket thereafter. But I'd say those guys love that. Go around to the Irish provinces when they're over here for a visit and get the insight. But yeah, decent game to be at if he was at the game at the weekend. But into the Leinster domination era.
Sky Sports and GA pull plug a 9-year broadcasting deal, and there's a picture of it's Gráinne McElwain and it's Jim McGuinness watching the Cork Kerry semi-final last May, and I just think that the competition was good.
Yeah,
competition has been good. It has driven standards. I don't really remember any innovation coming from RTE's coverage of GAA. I remember plenty coming from TG Carr's coverage. I remember plenty coming from Sky's coverage. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody out there is going to get in touch and say, well, they did this, this, this and this. But
no, I think
a monopolistic situation has not been good for them in the past in terms of creativity and innovation. Sky came along and were like, better pundits, better host.
Look, Gráinne McElwain was brilliant. The pundits were brilliant, and that's probably something that we're forgetting here as well. There's a human element, and not just the front of camera. There's a lot of jobs lost because of this Sky News as well. Interesting to see where the broadcasting rights go from here. And look, maybe the GAA have it all sorted out, and BBC are going to get a rake of games. But I'd worry that a lot of games are going to go to the streaming services and GAA Go. And
well, there's no other streaming services that are going to take it. So, there will be increased games on BBC Northern Ireland, according to several reports here, which would suggest that that has been briefed out. I don't know that. I know that BBC Northern Ireland were interested. The one thing about that is I don't know if they've been using HD on their games. So you're flicking and you're like, again, better coverage, better pundits, because they would use Canavan and
Mickey Hart and these lads,
and they'd have McGeeney on after he gets knocked out, which is always interesting to watch. But I don't know.
Like, you probably need because that's one of the issues with the Sky had, was the amount of games, and you're trying to cover them right. Maybe there could be a Monday night highlights show that's been mooted as well, because you can't get all the games into the Sunday game anyway. I'd love to see our state broadcaster have a dedicated sports channel. Now, I know that's something that again takes money and understandable, but I mean,
I wouldn't. Because why don't they just let other broadcasters like Virgin, who would have covered stuff in the past? Why are we using the taxpayers' money to cover stuff that Virgin would have used in the past? What's happened here is that RTE have taken the taxpayers' money, bundled it together, and it's preventing other broadcasters from having it. Like, pardon me. They've obviously made it too expensive and not economically viable for Virgin, even though it makes perfect sense for Virgin to do stuff like this.
Yeah. Virgin wasn't have an interest in it because
it's too expensive.
Well, this is the thing.
Well, it's been driven up by so RTE gets all this money from us. The free to air thing is like, well, you pay your licence fee. So it's not free to air. Virgin is free to air. We don't pay them any money. We don't give them any money as a country.
Yeah.
And they produce top quality. Again, you'd say their rugby coverage is better and has been traditionally better since they've started doing it.
And when you read Sky's statement after, you're kind of like, I understand that. They wanted more league games because league in the football especially is where it's at.
Well, and also the league, until TG Carr came along and started showing Sunday games, nobody really cared about the league.
Yeah.
And then they turned it into something. And then Setanta, back in the day, came along on Saturday nights and turned Saturday nights into something. And then eventually it works, and RTE are like, I will do this now that somebody else has made the hard yards and proved it was going to work. It's a very interesting point here from Sean Kelly, right? The worst thing of all would be a monopoly, because with that comes complacency. So GAA Go is actually still RTE's coverage. It's going to be their broadcasters and their team doing it. And like, what is the incentive for them to come up with the InVision replay or the puck out, which you see on TG Carr, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Where's the ball? We're watching the replay, and then there's the score down the far, and like, how did that happen?
But why can't they just do that?
You never miss it on TG Carr. I don't know. TG Carr have been doing it for a couple of years now, and I don't know why they haven't done it. But they still haven't.
There's a fear, and there might be a fear in RTE that they're going to be seen as copying the best things from Sky, the best things from TG Carr, the best things.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time.
No, but that's where the Sunday game kind of came out of match of the day, and that premise of sitting down and analysing games properly. But it hasn't really, as you say, developed. There have been other channels that have gone there, and as you said, behind the closed or behind the goals, puck outs and kick outs gave us something different. Even just the whiteboards, or not the whiteboards, but the interactive boards that Peter Canavan and the lads used during the games. Like, I remember watching the Armagh Monaghan game a couple of years ago, and at half time I was thinking, this is brilliant. This is like, normally at half time of an RTE you get a couple of questions in and it's fairly blasé stuff. Great pundits, but blasé enough coverage because they don't get the time to analyse it in depth. But on Sky you have the time to.
Some of the pundits were not great, but go on.
Yeah, no, it's fair, and a lot of them are subjective. But I mean, the Sky analysis has been always brilliant.
Yeah.
So now
you don't get moralising from the commentator going, "Oh, this is rubbish." You get explainers about why these two teams have matched up the way they have.
Yeah, so I'd be concerned. I'm going to hold fire on opinions until I see the final broadcast deal, which I don't know if it's due today.
Yeah.
So
this evening, you'll get it all this evening. You'll find out exactly. I don't know what's happening with the TV. I mean, unless there's a rabbit out of a hat.
Yeah.
It's going to be GA Go that you subscribe to on a match-by-match basis, or maybe you can get a season ticket, I don't know, to get whatever it is they're showing, which will be...
Mick Foley was fascinated on it last night with Joe, because he was kind of talking about, if the BBC get more games, and look, if they pick up kind of Sky's way of going about it, and they get the All-Ireland semi-final, and say the All-Ireland final, do they put the All-Ireland final on the generic BBC as opposed to just BBC Sport NI? Because that brings an increased traffic of viewers who weren't GA fans that Sky Sports brought in from the UK, perhaps.
No doubt. More BBC would be good.
Yeah.
Especially if it's going to be on their main channel. But again, if it's not on HD, I mean, what year are we in if it's not on HD? So hopefully it will be. I love Nivlock. I think he's great. I think their panel is great. I think their coverage is great because they all clearly love and are emotionally invested in the coverage. And again, I think that's not going to be necessarily a bad thing. But no competition. If there's no competition, then standards will, and we've seen this in every industry in the world, standards will decline. So fingers crossed there is competition today. It'd be great if there was. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly what is announced. That's all going to come a little bit later, and no doubt we'll be talking about it again on the show tomorrow. If you've got a view, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or you can leave a comment in the YouTube stream. Now, what else is going on in the world? Carl Mullaney is with us. Carl, good morning to you.
Good morning, lads. How's it going?
How are you?
Very good. Can't complain. Shamrock Rovers collected another Electricity League Premier Division title last night. Sligo Rovers doing them a little bit of a favour by playing out a 0-0 draw with second place Derry City at the showgrounds. That means that the hoops cannot be caught now.
Sligo Rovers fans in a very difficult spot last night, right?
Yeah.
What did you actually want to happen?
No, I mean you have to win you have to try and win the game, don't you?
At the same time, you play Shamrock Rovers champions.
Well, they were going to be champions anyway, I think. So look, I mean, Derry City had a really good season and potentially will win the cup. They play Shelburne in the final, so I think it's going to be a very good year and potential for a real rivalry to develop now between Shamrock Rovers and Derry City, I think, because Derry have certainly set out their stall in terms of investment in their squad and have a brilliant manager in Rory Higgins. So watch this space heading towards next season. But the two sides actually meet on Sunday at Tallaght Stadium, and Shamrock Rovers will be presented with the trophy afterwards. Elsewhere at the bottom of the table last night, a significant result for UCD. They played out a 1-1 draw with Shelburne. They're 3 points ahead of Finn Harps, and those two sides play against each other on Friday. UCD are in 9th and Finn Harps occupying that dreaded 10th spot, and if Finn Harps lose that match, they will be relegated to the First Division. Last night in the Premier League, West Ham playing out a 2-0 win over Bournemouth. Their manager David Moyes says they're moving in the right direction, and he's pleased with their home form at the London Stadium. The Hammers now up to 10th in the table. Mark Travers came on at half-time there for Bournemouth in place of the injured Neto. Unai Emery, the new manager of Aston Villa, he joins from Villarreal, where he won the Europa League in 2021. He replaces Stephen Gerrard, set to officially take up the role on the 1st of November. Champions League action tonight. Manchester City can secure top spot in Group G. They take on Borussia Dortmund in Germany from 8. At the same time in Group F, Celtic take on Shakhtar Donetsk at Parkhead, and from 5:45 in Group E, it's Chelsea against Salzburg. Donegal finally have their new senior football management team in place. Paddy Carr is the new manager. He'll be joined by head coach Aidan O'Rourke of Armagh. Carr, previously a manager of the Louth senior footballers, as was Aidan O'Rourke, and Carr also won an All-Ireland club title as manager of Kilmacud Crokes back in 2009. And in some cricket news this morning, Phil Simmons set to step down as the West Indies head coach later this year. It follows their surprise early exit at the T20 World Cup, where they actually lost to Ireland in the group stage and also to Scotland as well. And Simmons was previously the Ireland head coach before moving to that role with the West Indies.
What do you make of the Donegal appointment?
It's an interesting one, yeah.
Look, it's one of those appointments where you're like, I had heard that both Paddy Carr and Aidan O'Rourke were going for the job, but it seems that they combined their resources in order to become the combined.
It seems to be the done thing these days, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't the plan from the outset, by all accounts. But Paddy Carr, look, fan of man. He was involved in ratifying Declan Boner as well, so he's been at the forefront of a lot of decisions in Donegal. Like he's been a school principal, I think, in a school in Navan.
He's given it up now.
So that's an interesting point, isn't it? That he's given up his job. Colm O'Rourke gave up his job Now, both maybe had it intended to.
McStay's retired as well, isn't he?
Yeah, McStay. Jack O'Connor made similar comments as well, that he wouldn't be in charge of Kerry if he wasn't at a stage in his life where he can devote that much time.
Yeah.
And it probably, I mean, there has to be a wider discussion probably on the significant demands on inter-county managers right now.
Well, there was a plan to pay managers, you know, and say this is an important role. We acknowledge that you can only do it unless, if you only want rich people or retired people, fair enough. That's what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, and I'll even look at in my own county, in Monaghan, like Vinnie Corey he was my economics teacher in school. He's still teaching in Our Ladies in Castleblaney, so he's not giving up that job. But again, being a principal maybe is a different level of commitment to being a regular teacher. But the Donegal one's fascinating because I was kind of thinking for ages, is this job ever going to go over the line? Because once Rory Kavanagh pulled out, you're like, well, he was the shoe-in. Everyone thought he was just waiting for St Eunan's to be knocked out of the championship, but when he eventually turned it down, you're like, well, where are they going to go from here? And for Donegal's perspective, like I was just looking at their Ulster draw there for next season, reasonably kind. They've got down in the quarterfinals, Cavan or Antrim or Armagh in the semis, but they're well off the top sides the last couple of years. Like it's the 17th season for Michael Murphy. McBrearty's getting on, Ryan McHugh's getting on. They have a few lads coming in as well, but from a Donegal perspective, and we spoke to Declan Boner about this, like the Ulster final against Derry last year was so disappointing the way it
took it out of them, didn't it?
And then Armagh the second day around. So and it's kind of maybe been on a slide since the Cavan Ulster final of 2020, which they should have won, that COVID final at the Athletic Grounds. But yeah, from a Donegal perspective, I'd be interested to hear what Donegal fans think about this ticket. But Aidan O'Rourke is a man with a great football brain.
Oh yeah,
and I mean Paddy Carr has been there, done that.
I didn't realise Paddy Carr was a Donegal man, to be honest. So
yeah, fan it. So yeah, I mean the fact that he's had joy with Kilmacud at All Ireland level, the expectations are fairly low, I would say, for Donegal.
It's a good way to be coming in, I think.
Yeah, and their fitness levels were a big issue last year as well. I think that was pointed out by a number of pundits, but I'd be fascinated to see where they go with this year. You want to get to an Ulster final because obviously that helps for your championship and round robin and that sort of thing as well this season. So from a Donegal perspective, they need to hit the ground running. The league campaign is going to be fairly big for them. They have the Division 1 campaign to come. So I think, yeah, even though it's taken them till late October to finalise the management after the Donegal Championship has ended, the likes of Paddy Carr and Aidan O'Rourke will have had an eye on the Donegal Championship anyway, so it's not like they weren't watching. But yeah, an interesting appointment, the fact that the two of them are together.
One last thing you wanted to talk about here was Sean Dyche on Monday Night Football.
Oh, Dyche, you were watching as well, Cathal.
Yeah, I enjoyed him.
He was very good.
Yeah,
he brings a lot of value, and like I know a lot of the kind of good stuff comes after the match because, as we were saying earlier, the pre-game stuff is obviously focused on the match, but the game itself kind of petered out. West Ham Bournemouth last night, it allowed them. There was a couple of controversial handball decisions, but allowed them to kind of chat with Dyche a little bit more. It was Jamie Carragher alongside myself and Dave Jones. Like he didn't hold back. He said he hasn't watched any football in the summer. He's starting to watch football back now. He's all but putting himself back in the shop window, I would say.
Seems like a really good fella, I have to say.
Yeah.
Seems like a really, really good fella. And, you know, you would wish him all the very best. Part of me wonders, like, if he was that good last night, is there a room for him just to become a pundit?
Well, that's what I was going to say, but he strikes me as the sort of guy that is itching to get back in now, because he said he didn't, as you say, he didn't watch football for the first couple of months, but now that he's watching it more analytically now and thinking about changes that he might make if he was on the touchline.
Well, I think he mentioned itchy feet, as you know, he wants to get back into management. Like he was, and that was one of the interesting conversations they had last night. He's referred to as this 4-4-2 guy who plays defensive football, not great to watch sometimes, but he says he doesn't mind that because there's other attributes he says that are positive that don't get attributed to him, that the hard working, the players giving their all, and he says any of my teams I can promise are going to give their all. Like this guy took Burnley to 7th place in the
you do wonder what he'd be able to do with the better quality player,
bit of money as well.
Like is that was he butting up against the ceiling, or is the ceiling far higher with better players? Like, you know, it's one of those things where he's very unlikely to get an opportunity at a club who has money.
He was very interesting when he was asked as well about Graham Potter, and look, he's a fan of Graham Potter, and he said, look, he was basically asked by Carragher outright, you know, if you had been with Burnley the last year or two and got them to a position where Brighton were in, you know, 4th or 5th in the Premier League table, would you have been in consideration for the likes of that job, or even down the line for an England job or for a Liverpool job? And he said no, absolutely not, because Brighton are I guess sexier club, you know, new stadium, new money, and all that, and Burnley kind of have this image So maybe that and he spoke about how image is so important in football. Brighton had that image with Potter. Burnley had a different image under Dyche, and that leads to him getting offered certain types of jobs, and certainly not.
He wasn't mentioned for the Villa job, which would have kind of been, at the peak of where he would have been considered. So
he's kind of pigeonholed, isn't he, into that kind of bottom half of the Premier League, top half of the Championship.
Which is why a year of punditry would actually completely recalibrate what people thought of him. If he was to do some of those breakdowns, tactical breakdowns, and explain why this formation works in this instance, and do some European football matches, all of a sudden, chairman are looking at him going, okay, I'm going to give you a gig.
But that was one of the points made last night as well. Like any year, we're looking at teams like Wolves and Leeds and Forest in the relegation zone at the minute, or towards the bottom, and you're trying to decide who is really in trouble. When Burnley were in the relegation zones under Dyche, you actually never discussed them as real relegation.
It was that one year they had to win their last 5 games, and they squeaked out.
But other years early on, we say now October, November, if they were 19th or even 18th, you never really thought they were going to get relegated. You always thought because it's Sean Dyche, they're going to come through, and always they did. So
maybe the thing to do is to find one of those championship clubs with a bit of cash and kind of bring them up so you get the opportunity. Right, Cathal, good stuff. Thanks very much for that. More from Cathal across the day. Of course, OTB AM brought to you with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent mo. You can sign up or donate now at Movember.com. If you want to get in touch, you can leave a comment in the YouTube stream, or of course you can always get us on Twitter at OffTheBallAM. Listening to Jonathan Wilson describe Guardiola's City reminds me of Jim Gavin's Dublin. Yeah, a little bit. Does that mean they've got all the resources? Is that what you're talking about? Is that it? That they should be split? Patrick McHugh says Aston Villa have done really well here. Bask in the glow, Jar. We'll see.
How are you feeling? Are you excited? Like I'm actually. Remember, I was telling you I'm going to Aston Villa United a few weeks ago, and it turns out now it's going to be Unai Emery's first game. I'll be in the press box analysing the man very, very closely. So that'll be interesting. But the fact that it's his first game, his first 2 games in charge, in fact, are against United. They've got the Carabao Cup either before or after that. So an interesting start for Unai Emery.
Yeah, maybe one of Ronaldo's last games for United. Right, it's bang on 9 o'clock. Once again, Regatta Great Outdoors are launching their new Freddie Flintoff collection this autumn. And to celebrate, we have a €100 Regatta voucher to give away every day. One lucky winner, though, will get a €500 voucher to be in with a chance of winning. Just tell us who this is, deliberating about whether the star guest on OTB AM will appear as scheduled on tomorrow's show.
The game came too early for him, so it was. I think he will be fine Wednesday. I hope he's fine on Wednesday, but for today it was too quick.
Who's that? Tweet your answer to our main Twitter page at Off The Ball, and remember, shop the Freddie Flintoff collection in store at Regatta Great Outdoors or online at regatta.ie. Here's what we got on OTB Sports Radio for you today. The Wexford 56 team talked to us. That's an old piece now, when obviously they were still alive. Dadcast at 3, career retrospective with Matt Holland at 4, and Joe meets Ruby Walsh at 6 is OTB Gold. Matt Williams is going to pick the best 15 players he coached against next. Stay tuned.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Have you subscribed to the OTB Football Podcast?
Bruno Fernandes is one of those things where game to game now I'm just like, when do we give up? When do we give up faith in the man? Because he's got 1 goal in 13.
Was he not playing well at the start of the season?
He's playing reasonably well, but like in his first full season for United, he scored 28 goals. Now he's got 1 in 13 games.
There's so many players, like someone like Martinelli might not even get in a look in. Brazil are going to win that World Cup, lads. I think it's an absolute banker.
Subscribe now to the OTB Football Podcast stream wherever you get your podcasts, and download the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent mows.
Right, a couple of weeks ago, Keith Wood picked the best 15 that he played against. I'm delighted to say Matt Williams is going to pick the best 15 he coached against. Matt, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning to you. Very good, mate.
Keith Wood gave out to us for ruining his day when we pitched this at him. It looks like you've done a lot of work on this as well. And the players you've coached against, well, they're pretty good. Where did you start? What was your first team that you kind of took into account?
Well, the first thing was I'd never thought of this. It had never, ever crossed my mind. And when I got contacted by Colin, one of the producers, I went, wow, that's a great question. And I actually reached out to some of the guys I worked with over the years, and it took us a long time because there were just so many unbelievably good players. And then you come back and say, oh, we've forgotten so-and-so, we've forgotten so-and-so. And when we started to list it up, what I did was I listed out some of the players, not all of them, in the positions, and then who was the best and why. But wow, it is... I could put an argument for every 5 other players to be in those positions, and there was just such great quality around, because I was really privileged to coach against some absolutely incredible teams across the decade. So, it's a pretty decent list.
What was the earliest team that you coached against that made the list?
Well, I got to say, so I really, like a good bush lawyer, I did say who you coached against. So I went right back to the first time I coached, and I started very young. I was only 33, coaching first grade in Sydney at my old club, Eastwood Rugby Club. And of course, I coached against the great Randwick sides of that time that were basically Wallaby teams. You had Wallabies. This would be like young Munster or Lansdowne being a Wallaby team, and in their second 15, there's 3 or 4 Wallabies as well. It's just off the scale, And that was David Campuzzi. I coached against. I coached David with the Waratahs a few years later, but I coached against David at club level. But club rugby in Sydney in the 80s and 90s was the power base of the Wallabies that won World Cups. It was extraordinarily high standard. We look back on it now with this great understanding. That's what drove it. There were Wallabies everywhere. There were great players that couldn't be Wallabies. The standard was just so high. Look, they'd come out. The Sydney team didn't lose to an international team for 15 seasons. So every time a team would tour, including New Zealand, they would play a Sydney side, although they didn't play Sydney very often. But, they beat England, they beat Wales, beat Ireland. All of the great touring sides were beaten by that Sydney side. That's the height, that's the quality of the competition. At the time, it's deteriorated hugely since then, but that's what it was.
And so would Sydney pick the best players from the clubs, even if they were Wallabies? It was kind of like but you have to be playing for one of the Sydney clubs. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, you had to be. It was the best players in the Sydney competition, what we call a shoot shield.
Right.
And even though Australia might lose to them a couple of weeks later, the Sydney side beat them. But they had that tradition. They played at some beautiful little grounds that we'd fill up, and they were great players. And that was powered again by the Sydney schools and the New South Wales schools as it was then. And Mark Ella, the 3 Ella brothers, Campuzzi, that was a Randwick backline. I remember playing sevens against them, and they scored this try. We were leading them. We came out as an under-20s team in this sevens comp. We played Randwick, and we led them 7-0 at half-time. And they just scored these impossible tries. I remember Mark Ella walking back, just looking at me and goes, "Sorry, mate." And he meant it. He just took us apart. They were true. And Mark Ella's not on my list because I didn't coach against him, or Mark had retired. He retired at 26. Mark's the best player I ever saw. I have ever seen.
Are you?
Mark retired at 25. So he won the Grand Slam with the Wallabies in 84. And in 86, when they beat New Zealand, the last team before Ireland did to beat New Zealand in New Zealand and won at Eden Park, Mark was commentating, and he was 26 years old. And he never played international rugby again, which is just a tragedy, absolute tragedy. Because the coach at the time was a guy called Alan Jones, who was a really highly controversial coach. People either loved him or hated him, and Mark wouldn't play for him after the 84 Grand Slam tour, and he never played for the Wallabies again.
I'm concerned, Matt, looking at your list here, that you're going to piss off a lot of seriously talented players, because the list of players you haven't picked is probably the most impressive that I've seen. Where do you want to start?
Oh, mate, we'll start. Let's be sensible. Unlike how the Irish rugby teams announce their sides and start with number 1 and move to 15. Why we start at 15 then change back to 1 after 8 is one of the great mysteries of Irish rugby. And then you come to 16. Why not just start to 1 and go to 23? Isn't that the way everyone else in the world does it? So let's start with number 1. The great Oz Durant. Do you remember? So look, the best team. I could have easily picked the Auckland front row side of Dowd, Fitzpatrick and Ole Brown. That's the best front row I ever dealt with, and that was my first year that's when I first went into the top line coaching in Super Rugby. I was assistant coach in 96 and then head coach in 97, and that Auckland side is the best side I've ever coached against. The best side I've ever seen pretty much anywhere, and they were a provincial side. But the best loose head I ever coached against was Oz Durant, the great South African loose head. He was a giant of a human being, a farmer from the high veld, huge man. And I first met Oz in 96, and he went on and won the World Cup in 2007, which was just an extraordinary piece of longevity for him. But I think what I've tried to do is these guys change the game in their position. They was just so unique that the game had to move around their genius or their gifts. And Durant was just this unmovable object at the scrum that made any scrum he played in absolutely a weapon. And the size of the man's chest was just incomprehensible. He was, and he also had this beautiful farmer's personality. He was a lovely man. He was an extrovert, or still is an extrovert. But everyone had to adapt their scrummaging because of the size of this guy and the way he went about his game. And he was an absolute revelation to the scrum. So what the Australians had to do, we had to work on a way to take the scrum down a significant amount towards the ground. So to take away their strength in the south of the Australia, especially Oz Durant, the Wallabies and the Waratahs, all of us came up with this theory that if we could get them low enough, they can't use that strength on us. Now, there were huge risks in that as far as you fall over and collapse and you give away penalties. And in those days, there weren't as many penalties as bent arms. But you used the scrum. The scrum was your launch weapon to get the ball out. And that's what the South Africans didn't want. They wanted a scrummage and we wanted the ball liberated because we had great backlines. And so it changed the whole nature of scrummaging because of this one guy and the way the South Africans leveraged that.
You've Sean Fitzpatrick beside him. I think there's probably a generation who've grown up watching Sean Fitzpatrick on TV as opposed to watching him play rugby. So what was so special about him as a rugby player?
Well, Shawnee was he was the first, like, when I say cheeky, that's not the right word. He gave lip to everyone in the whole game, everywhere, for every second, and he matched it up with great skills, unbelievable competitiveness, a phenomenal leader, and was a personality, was an extrovert. You see Sean on TV, he's toned down from when he played. He was, and the New Zealanders had this persona as really dour, South Island farmers, and they were, they didn't smile. They were the most dour of the dour. And Sean wasn't. Sean was upbeat. They were electric. And that, he also led the modern New Zealand way of playing rugby, which was this extraordinary ball movement, great attack, great play from everyone, a 15-man game. New Zealand didn't play that. Up until that great Auckland side coached by Graham Henry, which Sean was captain of, New Zealand rugby was a very, very different beast, and that's why Australia could dominate. It was really very much an 8 to 9 man game or 10-man game with Grant Fox kicking, and Fitzpatrick led that revolution. Again, that's changed the game, changed the way hookers play. He was a forerunner of hookers like Woody, that were completely involved in the game. Runners, not just there to throw it for a line out or a scrum.
How close was Woody, Matt?
Very close, very, very close. I probably would never hear the end of it if I told him he was the best hooker I ever coached against. So I probably had a bit of a sway on it. Some red wine might have been spilt over that. But look, Keith was a great player. John Schmidt, and everyone you could argue to put in. I think the other part was I didn't coach against Keith much. It was only a few games where I coached against that great Auckland side twice a year. We'd go away at the beginning of the year for trials together, Canterbury, Queensland, Auckland and New South Wales. We'd go to up into Queensland and a thing called the South Pacific Cup, and we'd play each other as warm-up games for the Super Rugby. So we got to know these guys really well. We stayed in the same hotels, the same areas. You played games, and you were much more social after the games. There was interaction with the coaches, and so I got to know them very well, and I grew a great respect for them and a great understanding of how brilliant of players they were. Not saying that Keith wasn't. Keith took Leinster apart on a number of occasions when I was assistant coach there back in 99, 2000. But Sean just gets the nod for me.
Is that Dowd, Fitzpatrick, Olo Brown, that Auckland team, is that kind of the birth of the Auckland Blues and everything that comes from them, that philosophy, that style of play? Like, in many ways, is it? I don't know enough about the history of New Zealand rugby, but it sounds like with Graham Henry's fingerprints there and those players, that it's kind of a foundational text in how we consider, say, the team that wins the World Cup with McCaw and Carter in London as kind of like, that's the high water mark where everything is absolutely perfect, the handling is perfect, they're kicking off both feet, everybody is so sublimely skilled, and that's the absolute peak of what rugby can be. Is the birth of that this team? Is that kind of, am I overstretching a bit there, or is that it?
No, not at all. It's exactly right. And what happened was, when we went professional after the World Cup in '95, Auckland, which you would see in the NBC, which blue and white stripes, they were still a magnificent side. They won the Ranfurly Shield many, many times. They were a phenomenal side right through that era. But they didn't play that style of play. They had Grant Fox as their out half. He was much more a kicking player. Still a wonderful, wonderful player. Only a little man, 5'9", probably 82 kilos. Phenomenal footballer. But the metamorphosis of New Zealand rugby being based around 8 guys with a kicking game was this Auckland side under Henry, and these phenomenal players that they had through their side, like right through their side. Michael Jones, Jonah Lomu we'll get to later on, Carlos Spencer, Ronnie Clark, Lee Stencil. I can name the side because it's Zinzan Brook, Robin Brook, Michael Jones. This was a side that contained, probably 7 or 8, maybe more all-time great players, and they revolutionised the way New Zealand played rugby. And they were just in an era of really, really good teams in Super Rugby that had won the World Cup. 87, 91 was Australia, 95 was South Africa, and 99 Australia. So the Southern Hemisphere was dominating, and all those teams were in Super Rugby. The Auckland team was head and shoulders above that for a number of years, and before Canterbury came through and started to challenge them because of the quality that Auckland put together and revolutionised the playing of rugby.
Okay, fair enough. Adam Jones is the final member of your front row. What was it about Adam Jones that makes him ahead of like a fairly star-studded list of threes?
Yeah, John Hayes, the best lifter in the line-out I've ever seen. Ewan McKenzie, phenomenal player all round. But, and Olo Brown, as I said, just an incredible footballer. And also totally fit. I just think Jones was so outstanding. And the way that the team builds around a tight head prop, and that Wales side from that era that came to dominate for a considerable period of time around the 2005 mark, 2004 mark, when Mikey Ruddock won a Grand Slam with them. They built their team around him, and that sort of started this concept of you can build a team. If you get a quality tight head prop, you can build an organisation around that quality tight head prop. And what Adam Jones had, he wasn't just a scrummager. Like Oz Durant was a scrummager, pretty much full stop. He did other things, but certainly Adam Jones was a footballer, but he was also a supreme technician that went through on so many levels of the game. And really, you've got to say, a pretty average Welsh team for a period of time built a championship-winning side around his ability around the field and in the scrums. And that's a fair statement to say you can build a side around that one guy. And I believe that, I know that was Mikey Ruddock's thinking at the time.
You've got Paul O'Connell and John Eales as your second row partnership, which is, let's face it, world class, right? I think we have a fair idea of O'Connell. He's ahead of Mark Andrews and Martin Johnson for your number 4 jersey. Also a pretty star-studded list. So what swung it for O'Connell?
I have a lovely story about Paul that I told him once. It's my joke that Paul was injured when he was a very young player, and I was coaching Island A. We used to come in on a Wednesday, so Paul came in on the Wednesday. I think we were up in Belfast, and someone got hurt in the big boys, and on the Thursday he was called into the senior team and played that weekend. And I say he's the best learner I've ever coached because I taught him everything he knows in one day. He was just at that day at training, and I'll never forget it. Mark McCall was my assistant coach. Mark was gone on to win so many great trophies with Saracens. And that night at dinner with Brady Igo, we're sitting there and we all just looked at each other and said, how good is Paul O'Connell? Like, just in one day, we said, that guy is just head and shoulders above everyone in this place. Like, how good is this guy? And you then saw what Paul went on to do with his career, his leadership, his attention to detail. Over multiple years, he was just an incredible second rower. Compared to even the greats like Martin Johnson and these other great players, Paul just had these gifts of leadership, but also of incredible skills. His aerial ability to be lifted and catch restarts, I think, is the best I've ever seen. I mean, there's probably some guys out Matfield. Like, how can you leave out Victor Matfield? And, another great Irish second rower, Malcolm O'Kelly, except for Paul, would be regarded as our best second rower along with Willie John McBride. But because Paul was so dominant, people forget how great Malcolm O'Kelly was. And Malcolm was staggering. Malcolm would be the best second rower I coached, but he doesn't make that lineup over Paul.
John Eales, obviously a totemic figure in Australian history.
Yeah, no, like a freak and a gentleman, 6'7", can hit a golf ball like a mile. Should have played for Australia at cricket. Could have played top line basketball. Just could do everything. His nickname is Nobody. What a great nickname, because nobody's perfect. And that's John. John is a gentleman off the field. You would not find a more lovely human being. He is a great ambassador, and he was head and shoulders away the best second rower I've seen in my life.
Your back row is also sensationally well balanced. You've got Olivier Magne, Michael Jones and Zinzan Brooke. The players who don't make it are Pienaar, Rocky Elsom, Richard Hill, Serge Betson, David Wilson, Sean O'Brien, Emmanuel Aronordicki, Delalio, Teichmann and Anthony Foley. So I think by virtue of the players we've listed off who don't make it, people can get a sense of the quality there. So Mann, Jones and Zinzan Brooke.
Yeah, Zinzan Brooke, Eden Park, 1996. I was assistant coach. We were at the Waratahs. We go toe-to-toe with them. It's like a phenomenal game. It's like 40-43, and we've played our absolute hearts out. There's about a minute and a half to go. Auckland are behind. They're ramming on our left-hand touch line near the try line, like a metre out. We give away a penalty. Zinzan Brooke picks the ball up, and in the most, like a John Elway gridiron pass, 65 metres, the full width of Eden Park, into the hands of Jonah Lomu, who touches down on the other side of the field unopposed. And you just look there and go, that's just not fair. That's just not fair. The guy could do everything. He dropped a field goal against the Springboks to win a game. The back row moves that are sadly gone from the game now, that should come back, hopefully will come back one day because they're so entertaining, was about him with a ball in hand. He's the most skillful number 8 I've ever seen. He is the prototype of the tall, athletic, highly skilled number 8s that we want in the game, and he was the best by a mile. Inside him, he had Michael Jones, the best 7 I've ever seen. Michael was just this incredible athlete with a motor, could do anything on the ball, off the ball, against guys like Simon Poitevin, who are great players, but Jones was head above. And Olivier Magne, is the best 6 I've ever seen, the great French player. Again, would catch the ball in the line out, would act as a second out half in attack. Brilliant defender, kicker. The great French comeback in the semi-final in 1999 against New Zealand, where they beat New Zealand. People forget that it was Magne at the core of that, creating the breaks, creating the opportunities that the French wingers capitalised on. But Magne was at the heart of the greatest upset in the history of World Cup rugby. And I coached against Olivier a number of times for against Claremont, and also off the field, walked straight in the change room, shake hands, was beaten, heartbroken. Just a champion on every front, as they all were, Zinzan Brooke and Michael Jones, just really wonderful ambassadors of the game off the field as well.
Scrum half, Matt, it can't have been easy either. You're looking at names here that didn't make it: Matt Dawson, Peter Stringer, Gary Armstrong, Brian Redpath, Fabien Galtier, George Gregan, but you've opted for a late great South African as your pick.
Yeah, just again changed the game. Who had 6'4" scrum halves? It didn't exist. They didn't have the guys of that size playing scrum half just weren't in the game. And just the way he played, the physicality. And when I say physical, he wasn't a big man, but he was beautifully athletic. He was lightning quick, pass off both hands, kicking. But his threat as a runner was what revolutionised that play. Georgie Gregan was the other one that revolutionised because of his ability to take steps before passing. That we now see, if you look at Antoine Dupont, that is what makes Dupont a great player. But you imagine Dupont at 6'4", and that's what, or 6'2", which is what Just van Westhuizen was. And again, a phenomenal kicker of the game, unbelievable competitor, and drove South Africa to the 95 World Cup winning side. I coached against Juice when he was with Northern Transvaal at Super Rugby, and again, just an absolute beast of a man to defend, because he would literally, his threat meant you had to have 3 defenders either side of the ruck, always there, so that's 6 players out of the defensive line, just holding for Juice, because you could not let him run. If he ran, you lose. So you had to, that was your starting point. Okay, you 3 guys either side, lock in the ruck, make sure he doesn't get the gain line, and we all go forward and make him pass. But then he passes, and we're 6 defenders out of the game. He was an incredible man to tactically to try and nullify. And when you've got guys of that staggering talent, you can't. You can only try and minimise their impact on a game.
The list of out-halves who don't make it: Michael Lynagh, Stephen Larkham, Joel Stransky, Johnny Wilkinson, Henry Honeywell, Roland O'Gara, Freddie Michalak and Andrew Mertens. So it must be someone bloody good, Matt. Who is it?
Mate, how could you leave those guys out? Carlos Spencer, and I guess it's also that what Carlos Spencer, the combination that Carlos Spencer did, he was this gifted athlete. Like, the guy was like he was like the cover of Men's Health magazine. He had a 6-pack, he had shoulders. He was electric over 20 metres, like absolutely electric. And the only player I've seen with ball skills equal to him was Mark Ella. Mark Ella was better. That tells you how good Ella was. But Carlos Spencer used to do this play when I was coaching the Waratahs. He would catch the ball from his 9. He would pass to his 12. But he really didn't pass to the 12. You can't believe this. Because he would then recatch the pass that he was pretending to give to his 12. He would turn his body completely around and pop the ball from his right-hand side back inside his left-hand shoulder. So let me say that again. He catches, passes to no one, recatches, and puts the ball back behind his back to the left-hand side, at which point Jonah Lomu would hit that ball at 110 miles an hour. It was the most indefensible play I have ever seen. And the first time I saw it, I was sitting with Al Gaffney, and we sort of were silent for a second. And then we both said, did he just pass, recatch, and throw it back over? And I remember our backline was defending. Manny Edmonds was at 10. And it's just indefensible. You just couldn't, because who do you stop? Who do you go to? And then the key, the attack weapon, is Lomu at full pace. He could just do things that I've never, apart from Mark Ella, I've never seen anyone do. And even Mark Ella, he had more pace over 100 than Mark. So he would quite often go 80, 90 metres and make breaks. Kick the ball both feet, spiral kicks like Ronan could. Probably never fulfilled his potential at the top level as winning a World Cup, but was the most awesome player I've ever seen.
I have to say, I remember watching him at the World Cup, and like there were between the legs passes, no look stuff. I feel a little bit like if he had won a World Cup, the game of rugby would have benefited massively, because people stuck it to him. Oh, you're all fancy Dan, you can do it when the big game isn't on the line. I'm like, that's not really what happened here. He did not cost him the World Cup. The rest of the team and the systems weren't in place. But if he'd won the World Cup, then every kid in the world would have been encouraged to try the nonsensical and to try and dream the dream that Carlos Spencer dreamed. And I actually felt like a mechanical form of rugby that was a bit soul-crushing, that was a bit South African, that was a bit England, took over as the dominant. Well, this is how you win a World Cup, because you get it done, you stick it up the jumper, and whatever you do, don't be a fancy Dan like Carlos Spencer.
100%, mate, 100%. And that was always the argument. If you watch, again, the 2 greatest games of rugby I've ever seen, involved France. The semi-final of the 87 World Cup where they beat Australia in Australia, and the 99 semi-final where they beat New Zealand at Twickenham. And I was fortunate to be at both games. But people forget, if you watch the first half of that France-New Zealand game where New Zealand absolutely dominated and Lomu scored some great tries, it was Spencer that was creating all the space, Spencer that was creating all the havoc with Jonah Lomu and Tana Umunga. He was absolutely incredible. Spencer did not lose that game. A number of other people missing tackles and dropping balls cost them that day. And it was a great New Zealand side that should, and if they had got through, I'm pretty certain they would have beaten Australia that day in the final. But they didn't, and Australia won it. But I do agree with you. And Spencer has not, and Lomu in New Zealand are not remembered the way they should be because of that day.
Jonah Lomu is your number 11, and he's the only uncontested player you have in your team, which suggests that this was the easiest decision you had to make.
Absolutely. First name. I wrote 1 to 15. I said, well, who's in? I said, Lomu. I've never seen anything like him. And I don't think I ever will. He is the greatest winger. You just can't describe what it was like to coach against him. He was a colossus. And you're searching for adjectives and verbs to describe what this man could do. The first time I saw him in the old days, they played curtain races before test matches. And usually it was Australian schoolboys versus New Zealand schoolboys. It would start about 1 o'clock, and then the main game would start at 3. And that was a very much an Australian tradition. We would always have 2 games on test match day. He played number 8 for New Zealand schools this day. And you just said, wow, who is this kid? He picked the ball up the base of the scrum and would go 80 metres. He did it 4 or 5 times. Everyone was like, my goodness, what a number 8. About 2 weeks later, he's on the wing for Auckland. This guy is just steamrolling everyone that he comes up against. And, we saw what he did at the 95 World Cup. Poor old Mike Catt, who was a phenomenal player, happened to be the guy that got steamrolled by him, and people remember that. It was very unfair on Mike because he was an absolutely fine rugby player. And Jonah did it to everyone, absolutely everyone. We played them at Auckland, Eden Park in 1999. I'll never forget, I turned Strauss, the great South African captain who had emigrated to Australia, and I got back to play rugby with us. And Straussy just says, I'm going to tackle him, follow me. As soon as he gets the ball, I'm going to be the one. And Straussy was a brave guy, big dude. And sure enough, Lomu gets the ball and leading the charge of Straussy straight at him, hurls himself at him. I have this vivid memory of Tian tumbling over backwards as Jonah just goes straight through. The size of the man, the pace of him, his power, and his ability to get involved in the game. And his linking, again, as I said before, with Carlos Spencer. He was at his most dangerous when Spencer brought him in from the blind side. So people think of him on the end of a back line. But when that guy was coming in off 10 or 12, with Spencer taking the ball deep to the line, and then he's got his options. He's got a Ronnie Clark and Lee Stensis in front, or he's got Jonah Lomu or Joeli Vendiri out the back. My God, it was a nightmare. And he was phenomenal. And again, Jonah, off the field, was this quietly spoken, lovely young man.
Yeah.
Just a tragedy that we lost him so early.
100%. Your centre partnership is Tim Horan and Brian O'Driscoll. I know when we talked to Brian about his heroes, Tim Horan is definitely somebody he would name check as an inspiration in terms of being a centre. Again, just to indicate some of the players who didn't make it here: Damien Try, Felipe Contepomi, Gordon Darcy, Henny LaRue, Sterling Mortlock, Jason Little, Yannick Josian and Will Greenwood. Again, Horan and O'Driscoll I think is like one of the all-time great dream team partnerships.
Yeah, it tells you a bit about Australian rugby at the time too, that you could have Horan and Jason Little, who were a great partnership, and Sterling Mortlock, 3 great centres with the Australian 3-quarter line now. Like, wow, it's just not even in the top 7 or 8 in the world. But we were gifted. And Timmy, he's got a great, he's like me, he's got Irish ancestry, his family's from Tipperary, was phenomenal over many years. So Tim, first they won the Bledisloe Cup in '89 when Tim and Jason were kids in the centres. I think they were 19 in the centres. And Tim had a horrific knee injury, came back, won a World Cup in 91, won a World Cup in 99, So over a 12-year career with the Wallabies was staggering. I coached against Tim for New South Wales many times against Queensland, which is Munster versus Leinster, the blue versus the red, and the same thing. You only had to win one game each year, and that was against Queensland. If you didn't beat Queensland, you were in a lot of trouble. And they were a great side with Horan and Little and Earls. It was an unbelievably good Queensland side. And again, Tim could change a game in a split second. He revolutionised the way that inside centres play. Tim was very athletic guy, very powerful, but was not a tall guy. A bit like very, very similar to Brian in physique, probably a bit bigger than Brian in his muscularity. But Tim could accelerate so unbelievably over 15 metres and use his footwork to get to shoulders of the defenders, and then he also had a pass. But the break that Tim had was staggering. I think the other thing with Tim was he was beautifully complemented by Jason as an outside. Jason was tall and rangy, a bit like Shane Horgan, where Tim was this more compact, brilliantly fast player. I actually thought of playing Brian at 12 for a while when Brian was very young back in 99, because he reminded me so much of Timmy Horan. But Brian's ability to go on the outside was just so good that he was a natural outside centre. But it did cross my mind at the time.
Okay, Campese, you've mentioned it at 14 was somebody. For some of our younger listeners who might not be utterly familiar with Campese's range of tricks, a little bit like what you were talking about, Carlos Spencer, there was kind of a preternatural ability to understand where other people were without looking, or it was kind of a sixth sense about where they were.
Yeah, he's close to the two best players I ever coached were Brian and David, and both of them had a sixth sense. And Campo, firstly, he was magnificently fit and magnificently skilled for the amateur era. He only lasted 2 years. He was in the professional era. He won the 91 World Cup, but he was playing. He played for the Wallabies in the Grand Slam in '84 when he was only 19. David could kick the ball 70 metres both feet. He is the best punter of a ball I've ever seen in my life. He practiced. He's also the best trainer. Trained his heart out. He is electric speed. He did a goose step. He was the first person to bring the goose step in. Again, changed the game. Footwork that we now see regularly. That he was the first person to do that. He literally invented it. Brought it into the game of rugby. Scored tries. To give you an example, you measure how many times people touch the ball in the game. So your 9s and 10s and your 2s and your 8s touch the ball more than anyone else. You come to the end of a game and Campese would touch the ball more times than everyone on the team except for the halfback. He got involved from the wing like no one I've ever seen. He revolutionised the position. And again, until Jonah came up, he was considered the greatest player in the world. Was for many years the greatest player in the world, greatest attacking player. If young people go and Google up his tries, and they stand the test of time. He is a staggering athlete.
And the last one is, sorry, were you going to?
No, I was on that last one. Like I think Keith Wood picked Jason Robinson maybe, but that was on the wing possibly. But Matt, you've gone with Robinson mentioned there at fullback at 15, but you've got like the list of names again: Latham, Montgomery, Wilson, Poitrenaud, Gervin Dempsey, Rob Kearney, Joubert. But you've opted for an All Black as your fullback.
Christian Cullen. When Christian Cullen signed for Munster, I first heard and went, wow, that's a phenomenal signing. Christian Cullen, at his peak in New Zealand, I was coaching Super Rugby, so he was playing for Wellington and also with Tana Umunga in that side. He was a freak. He was an absolute freak of nature, a very slight man, 83 kilos, yet he could bench press almost double his body weight. He was just this power athlete that was slight, unbelievable acceleration, great kicker of the ball, but his footwork was staggering. If you kicked to him and you didn't have a kick chase line that was absolutely disciplined and organised and brilliant in their tackling, he'd go 100 metres. There's a great clip up. It's actually against does the rounds often when Christian Cullen's name come up, of him scoring a try against the Waratahs in the Sydney Football Stadium. Now, in my defence, he takes the ball in his own try line, he goes 100. I'd ask everyone to look at the score. We were leading 45-12 at the time. And we did win the game. We did win the game, which is quite often not remembered by people when they text me, "Weren't you coach when he scored that try?" And I was. But we did win the game. But that's what Cullen could do. In those days, we would tour South Africa together with the New Zealand side. So the two provincial sides from Australia, one from New Zealand, would go to South Africa, and we stay in the same hotel for 2 weeks. So you got to know these guys really well, and you got to watch them train and got to watch them as they conduct themselves. Cullen, in a generation that had Jeff Wilson and Lomu, was a staggering athlete. His star was only brief. That's the only thing I would say about Christian. When he didn't last the length of time of other players, but it was an incredibly bright star. It's definitely one of the great sporting tragedies that he didn't get to fulfil his time at Munster and show glimpses of what he was capable of, because I know it rankers with him that people here don't think of him the way you guys do think of him, because we didn't really get to see that in person, and it kind of makes it all the more sad, really, because like that Munster team was crying out for somebody like that to be added to the mix. Irish rugby was crying out for it, and you look what Dougie Howell did when he got there. Christian was just a staggering athlete. And I've huge respect for Dougie. Like, he's an unbelievable player, but Christian at his best was in my opinion, a step above, just slightly above Dougie. Dougie was a legend. Christian would have been phenomenal for the game in Ireland, and it was really sad. I felt for him because he's also a really lovely bloke. He's a down to earth guy, and he wouldn't go to any team without wanting to do his best, and he certainly didn't get that opportunity, not through anyone's fault, to show what he could do. Matt, that 15 is a match for any team in the history of the world. It is a phenomenal team that you put together. Thanks so much for doing the work for us. Thanks for asking me. It was good fun. I really enjoyed it. A brilliant thought experiment. The best 15 that Matt Williams coached against there. If you've got any views on that, you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. Maybe you're like Terry Kelly and you love Shane's tracky top, half expecting him to start breakdancing at any moment. You're not going to get into breakdancing from me, but no, I appreciate the comments on the fashion always. You're not a breakdancer? Not a breakdancer. You don't want to see me dance in any capacity. What are you? Well, no. I can't even jive, and as a Monaghan man, that's like it's almost like a birthright that you should be able to jive, but right. I can't jive. Line dance with the best of them, though. Well, you've been to Garth Brooks, so you're probably the line dancer of the pair of us. It's 9:40. OTB AM is brought to you live each morning in association with Movember. Brought to you by Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent mow. You can sign up or donate now at Movember.com. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Republic of Ireland superstar Denise O'Sullivan. We're following the weekend's World Cup draw. Keith Wood's going to be on the line, as well as recently crowned European Boxing Championship silver medalist Christina Desmond. And Tommy Rooney will give us his predictions ahead of this Friday's GA All-Stars. In the meantime, some Pat Nevin goodness. Enjoy.
Arsenal's lead cut from 4 points to 2. Newcastle into a Champions League spot. Jurgen Klopp, well, as he said himself, as low as possible was the mood after Liverpool's defeat at the City Ground. The post-Gerrard era at Villa off to a flyer. Fulham going very, very well. Leeds and Wolves far less so, both in the relegation zone. Our top four at the moment, Arsenal, City, Spurs and Newcastle. Very happy to say, as ever, Pat Nevin is with us on a Monday evening. Hello.
Hello, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm great. So, lots to get into. Nottingham Forest 1, Liverpool 0 got the weekend off to an interesting start. One of the stats, I don't want to get botch cause and effect here, but 3 Liverpool players aged 21 are younger in the starting lineup. It was interesting. First time in 6 years that it happened under Klopp. That's not to blame. The 3 players 21 are under, but something's gone very awry here for Liverpool. There was a question mark last week. Could that win against Man City jumpstart something? Well, we got our answer, I'm afraid.
Exactly. I was at the West Ham game when they played West Ham, and they were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Liverpool against West Ham for 45 minutes, and then they weren't brilliant, and they were very far away from being brilliant after that, and they were lucky in the end to get away with the 3 points at Anfield. So it tells you there's a very good team in there, but whether they can keep it at that high level, every 3 or 4 days, I think the answer is quite simply no. It's harder. And will that team ever be back to what they were before at that level? Or do you need to refresh, possibly rebuild? And are we actually in the end in a transition season for Liverpool? A couple of people have said that to me now. So a couple of people have said, yeah, it's obvious. That's what he's doing. Have a look, and it's only the start of it. They have got quite a few younger players, and you do need to rebuild. I mean, that Liverpool team has been, although a couple of changes, it's been quite a while. It's been together quite a while. And I'm not saying they're gone, they're past it, they're dead, they're useless, nothing like that. Probably now's the time to absolutely sit down and think, right, okay, where's the rebuild? How does it have to be done? Because if you keep on trying to, be, the way they were for 3, 4, 5, 6 years there, and it's not going to happen, then that's not going to look good in Jurgen Klopp, because you're kind of holding on to something that's gone, and it looks sometimes a wee bit sad in football. So I have a suspicion, like a number of others, that it's just the start of a rebuild. And I would hope and utterly expect that he's allowed to do that. You're absolutely allowed to do that. Sir Alex Ferguson was allowed to do that. Wenger was allowed to do that. But very few are. To some degree, Pep, although they've never had that much of a dip, has made quite a lot of changes and adaptations. But is that more the question? Is it, okay, they can't be that again to that level? It needs a rebuild. And I have a kind of suspicion that's what it is now, because of the phrase you say, 3 under-21s. That's not completely lack of strength and depth. That's maybe, right, this is where we have to go.
Yeah, and there are certain mitigating circumstances, I'm sure. Thiago waking up with an earache, I think, at 5 a.m, and that ruled him out. And Henderson is obviously not quite 100%. I don't know what's going on there, but he's on the bench and he doesn't get the nod for a game like this. I presume Klopp will be given full latitude to rebuild over quite a prolonged period of time. He has near infinite credit in the bank.
I would hope so. I mean, in this game you think and you hope you see it, but things change. I can't imagine any way they won't give him any more than a year and a half, 2 years to do it. I mean, which is unbelievable in modern football, just unthinkable in modern football. But he's got so much credit. There's staggering amounts of credit, and so he should, considering what Liverpool had been for a while and what he's brought them to being. Massive amounts of credit, and he's shown that he can build it. Not just him, it's not just Klopp. I mean, he's been good. He's adapted a little bit recently as well, and you have to adapt as the game goes on. But it's they have brought in really interesting players that shocked everyone. They go all the way back to Salah, and the vast majority of people no chance saw that happen to the level that's happened. But even the most recent ones are coming in, and you're looking at them thinking, yeah, I like the look of some of it. I certainly can see what they're trying to do. And just a young player they've brought from Aberdeen in Scotland, a fullback, and I've seen a bit. And they're obviously looking in that direction and willing to move heftily in that direction. So that's not Jurgen Klopp doing that. That's good acquisitions policy and a good acquisitions group that you've got there. So it's time for them to step up. And I do know they have changed individuals in there over the years, and sometimes it's about individuals, but it also has to be about an ethos. So I think this is a hugely important time for Liverpool Football Club, and not my place to say it, but a hugely important time for Liverpool fans to get behind their club, get behind their players, because it might not be easy for a while.
And say, to take Saturday as the example, the likes of Elliott, Curtis Jones, Carvalho, do you see them as having the requisite talent and potential to be mainstays of championship winning side into the future? Will they be supporting cast type players, and Liverpool will have to spend heavily enough to get mainstays who will lead them towards titles, or is it too hard to tell this early in their development?
There are some geniuses out there who know how to do that sort of thing. I'm not one of them for kids. Now and again you see a kid and you go, wow, and you see all the technical ability, and it's certainly, there's one or two you think, well, that's going to be absolutely fine, don't worry about that, he's going to be good enough to do it. Others, they just grow at different levels. They just move at different levels, and you don't know exactly what the levels are going to be. But I'm kind of looking at most of them and thinking, no, you know what you're doing, it's in a good position. Certainly Elliott I wouldn't worry in the slightest about him. He's fine. He would If he was at Man City's academy, you'd say, yeah, he'll get to the first team, he'll be fine. He's that good. He's that technically good as well. It's a wee bit harder to tell the ability to the other ones, particularly if you're just coming from the outside, from another nation. It gets that little bit harder to be able to guess if that's going to be the case. Cathal has got brilliant skills. I mean, fabulous skills, but there's a lot of players around with a lot of skills at the moment. I'm sure I've talked to yourself and many people before about, I could watch Crystal Palace every week with some of the players that they're producing. Eze's from Zaha, obviously, but every time you watch them, seem to have another brilliant, technically fantastic dribbler who's got good vision, etc. But it's something else on top of that, isn't it? It's a kind of whole vision of football knowledge that's on those steps above that you're asking about. And I don't think you know really until the 21, 22, 23 with the vast majority of players. So, good ones in there, but it's going to have to come from outside as well.
Well, also, I would think Jurgen Klopp finds himself in this, if this is a rebuilding phase, it's an unplanned one. I mean, they were step in step with City towards the end of last season. They were on the cusp of winning everything. They give Mo Salah a huge new contract. There is a sense, well, we are going to do what we can here to stay very competitive in the short term. And it's almost the way the season has unfolded. Whether they knew it was coming or not would be an interesting question. If you could ask Klopp privately, did you see almost this sudden halt coming is the interesting question. But I suspect he couldn't have anticipated it to be this tottering a halt. And so he might just have to say, well, let's go full-on rebuild phase now.
I wouldn't be surprised if he does that. Not right off the season. I still wouldn't be shocked if they got top four. But that's very, very different for chasing for the league. It's very different.
Or Champions League, I guess. They might fancy their chances of being a great, quote-unquote, cup team at that level. And I
agree that players like Salah can lift themselves for that.
Yeah.
But it's a huge amount you're going to ask for them. But I wouldn't be surprised if they go through and do really well in that as well. But asking about what you could and couldn't see coming, right? So Salah getting a new contract, and we know he's still brilliant. But there's always the but, isn't there? You know the age. You know the expectations of these games in such a short period of time. Eventually it comes to us all. I mean, it absolutely comes to us all. So there's a question mark over Salah, is he going to be able to do it Premier League? Because it's harder in that league to do it when you're older than any other league in the world. Firmino, I think contract comes up at the end of the season. And again, he's no spring chicken either. And you've lost Mane. So that front line that was the genius it was, and they've had great front lines in the past, obviously. It's going all the way back to Sterling. But I'm not absolutely convinced they've seen it coming this quickly.
No.
But I think they did see it coming, and they've been trying to consider how to kind of recover it. The problem they've got now is the problem everybody's got now. They used to be fighting against Man City and maybe a bit of Chelsea and a tiny bit of Manchester United for the players they were going for. There's loads of them now. Newcastle will be fine. Yeah, I suspect. Players would probably still go to Liverpool above Arsenal, but you better not fall too far, because that'll change. Players go where they think there's going to be success, and there is the London draw, the massive London draw, which, if you've got Arsenal who are successful, Chelsea who, if they get successful again, Spurs, you never quite know with them, they might be getting successful again. It's going to be harder. This rebuild will be harder than the initial build, I suspect.
Just want to ask you about Leeds and Fulham at Ellen Road. Leeds 2, Fulham 3. It was 3-1. There was a late consolation goal for Leeds. We haven't talked about Fulham really at all this season, certainly not in any depth. Just 4 defeats and 12, 5 wins. Fulham have scored more goals than Manchester United. They've scored more goals than Chelsea. Fulham have scored more goals than Newcastle. Now, they've conceded their fair share as well. They've scored 22, conceded 22. But that's just worth remarking on, that Marco Silva's doing a very, very good job there. They beat Leeds. Jesse Marsh afterwards were hurting. They had more possession and more attempts in this game than Fulham. And I was thinking of you last week, where you watched Leeds lose to Arsenal. And I know, the idea of having a bit of luck is not the most satisfying an analytical take, but I got the sense you were very impressed with Leeds against Arsenal. They really could have got something out of the game, but they sit here with just 2 wins. They're in the bottom 3. I don't know how much time will be extended to Jesse Marsh. It's quite an interesting situation.
It's a really interesting situation. Funnily enough, a Leeds United supporter got in touch with me after the game, and he goes to every game, and he said, "Can we buy you a season ticket, Pat? Because I've been to see them twice this season. They were brilliant against Arsenal, and they were brilliant against Chelsea, and they battered Chelsea 3-0. And they obviously think I am the kind of lucky charm, because and you can usually tell by what you see with your own eyes, and they were brilliant in both of those two games.
Right.
And then you look at where they are in the league, and I do watch highlights, and the odd game I can catch it with them, and it is startling to see that they can be that high and that low. Maybe the thing about luck is if you're not structured that well at the back, you can only get lucky for so long. You know, you will be caught. And there are a couple of weaknesses in that back line where in the Premier League you'll just get done. You know, and it's kind of getting noticeable now that Leeds are getting done a wee bit too often. And even though I do like them as a team, you need to the back line's where you build it from. Watching Lampard at Everton, he's got it now. He figured it out. You got to work from the back line, and now that they're working for the back line, they look like a grown-up team. That's not to say you've got to be boring, and I don't think Leeds have done that. You know, I think they are, and I love them for it, and I love Bielsa for it. They're not quite Bielsa team, but I love them for that openness. But they probably needed to put a wee bit more time and effort into that back line and make sure they had real quality there, which I'm not sure there's enough of it there in the back line. By the way, there is a good reason why most people in the media haven't spoken about Fulham. There's a very, very good reason for it. Because we never saw it coming, right? At all.
No one got to say, "I told you so."
Then we kind of say, yeah, of course, I always thought they were going to do well. Because nobody did. And anybody's, I've not seen many or any who've said it. It was all about Mitrovic isn't going to be able to score, and you know they're not going to be able to live with teams. And then there was that wee moment against Liverpool. You thought, oh,
something there.
And then you look at them now, and particularly down at Fulham. But I know the game was against Leeds was up at Eleanor, but particularly at Fulham, hard place to. I was going to say horrible. It's not horrible. It's a lovely little ground, but it's a hard place to go and win a game of football because it's stunningly tight, and they use that really well.
Stamford Bridge Saturday was very interesting. Game, if not quite of two halves of the first 35 minutes and then the remainder. So Graham Potter makes his substitution. First 35, I know you always give us a great tactical sense of what's going on. So it certainly seemed like life was very enjoyable for the Manchester United midfield. And to Potter's credit, he didn't sit in his hands until half-time or hope that they got away with it. He did act decisively, and it seemed to do the trick.
Well, he sat in his hands for 15 minutes longer than I thought he should have.
Really? Yeah, it was that glaring. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was doing the game from right up at the back of the main stand, right? So I've got the bird's eye perfect view of the tactics. And, without boring the world, if anybody watched Danny Murphy doing the analysis on it, it's kind of all you need to see. You got it absolutely nailed. He's spot on, 100% dead right. I was trying to figure that out, after 10 minutes. And had figured it out after 10 minutes because it was that glaringly off. Sometimes you need really to have a great insight into the game, and it's about putting in a diamond when you've got two and why a 3-4-3 doesn't work against a 4-2-3. Sometimes it's something easier. Sometimes it's they've got three midfielders and you've only got two, and that's it.
This was Ireland at Euro 2012 level of tactical insight needed. Yeah. And it does help when you've Kovacic on the bench, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, to be honest, they've kind of got a lot of players they could have brought in and done that. They could have put Mount back in there in that situation. They've got a whole bunch of them there. The Chukwuemeka, he could do that as well. The new lad, by the way, watch out for him. Jeez, he's got power and he's got pace. But they've got a whole bunch that could have done that. But it was what we was going to do. And I was doing the commentary and I was saying, well, Graham Potter's going to change this quite soon. And it's just interesting to see what he will change it to because they're playing 3-4-3 just now. They're getting battered. Right? By the way, for anyone, and I know I'm talking to News Talk people here, so you get football, right? But 3-4-3, 4 sounds like 4 midfielders, 4 isn't 4 midfielders. It's 2 wing backs and 2 midfielders, right? So that's why you're outnumbered there. And the intriguing thing is to say, what I was looking at, you're going to change it, mate. You'll figure this out quickly. But what are you going to do? because there's a negative way to do it and there's a positive way to do it. You know, so the negative way to do it is, you know, just bring another guy back from the front line and you end up playing a 5-3-2 or a 5-3-1-1, and you've equalised it in the middle there, right? But you still get your back three. But it's a kind of negative way to do it, you know. And the positive way to do it is to hook a centre back, and of course he does the positive thing. He hooks a centre back, and just makes it that diamond and two up front. And it was intriguing because it's kind of out of the coach's playbook. It's fine. But the last guy I remember seeing doing that at Stamford Bridge was Jose Mourinho. He would have done that. And he didn't care about feelings at that point in time, did he?
No.
We know Potter does, so that must have been hard for him to do.
And it was interesting, he made a point of going to Cucurella, who responded and said, I get it, I know this isn't about me. Does it exemplify the issue, though, in that they didn't really need Cucurella and they have Chilwell? Like, is this a case of trying to fit two of my better players on the same pitch? Is that why he went with 3-4-3?
I'm intrigued by this Cucurella thing. I had a really interesting talk with somebody down at Stamford Bridge at the game. So this Cucurella, Chilwell, I'm sure I said it to you. I can't remember what I said to everyone, but about the fact that Scotland used Robertson and Tierney, and now get them to work in a three, and they take in turns for one to fly and one to stay, but they both know each other's position that well that it really confuses people when you play against them. And I'm thinking, it took Stevie Clark a wee while to get that working in Scotland, but it's brilliant, and it really is quite brilliant now when they're both fit, which isn't that regular. However, I hadn't really seen it before. I was chatting to somebody up at Stamford Bridge, and they went, yeah, like Lusso and Babayaro. I went, oh, wow, right.
That has been plucked.
OTB AM with Gillette in association with Movember. Effortless shave, magnificent modes. The Football Pod.